Clara Dawson's fingers had turned blue by the time she accepted the truth. No one was coming for her. The mail-order bride from Boston stood alone on a Montana platform in February 1878, watching her future disappear with the departing train. She'd crossed a continent to marry a stranger, only to find herself abandoned in a blizzard with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Then hoofbeats echoed through the storm, and everything changed. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The cold came at Clara Dawson like a living thing. It clawed through the wool of her Boston cloak, scraped across her cheeks with icy fingers, and burrowed deep into her bones until even her thoughts seemed to freeze mid-form. She stood on the bare wooden platform of Silver Ridge Station, Montana Territory, watching the locomotive that had carried her 2,000 miles westward disappear into the white fury of the afternoon blizzard. The sound of its whistle grew fainter, then fainter still, until there was nothing left but the howl of wind and the terrible, suffocating silence of abandonment. Clara pulled her inadequate cloak tighter, though it did no good. The garment had been perfectly suitable for Boston winters. Mild, genteel affairs with snow that fell like lace and cold that could be defeated with a good fire and a cup of tea. But this Montana cold was something else entirely. It was merciless, predatory, the kind of cold that killed. Her carpetbag sat beside her feet, already dusted with snow. Inside it lay everything she owned in the world: 3 dresses, 2 nightgowns, a pair of worn boots, her mother's Bible, a silver hairbrush that had belonged to her grandmother, and the letters. Those damned letters that had brought her here. She'd read them so many times during the journey that she'd memorized every word. James Porter, rancher and widower, seeking a wife of good character and steady temperament. A man who promised a home, security, and honest work in exchange for companionship and partnership. His words had been simple but kind, his penmanship neat and careful. He'd seemed like salvation when Clara had received his response to her advertisement in the matrimonial news, because by then she'd been desperate. Clara closed her eyes against the memory of Boston, against the shame that still burned hotter than any Montana cold. Her father's death, the debts he'd hidden, the creditors who'd stripped their home of everything valuable, the landlord who'd looked at her with calculating eyes and made suggestions that turned her stomach. She'd had choices, all of them terrible. The poorhouse, the factory with its killing hours and starvation wages, or worse, the streets claimed women like her every day, women who'd once had families and futures and found themselves with neither. The matrimonial advertisement had seemed like a miracle, a way west, a fresh start, a chance to be something other than a cautionary tale whispered in Boston drawing rooms. But now, standing alone on this godforsaken platform, with ice forming on her eyelashes, Clara understood with brutal clarity that she'd simply traded one form of ruin for another. "He's not coming," she whispered to herself, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "James Porter is not coming." The station master had disappeared inside his office an hour ago, after taking one look at her face and shaking his head. "Don't know nothing about no James Porter expecting a bride," he'd said, tobacco juice staining his gray beard. "And I know most folks around here. You sure you got the right town?" She'd shown him the letters, pointed to the address written in James Porter's careful hand. Silver Ridge, Montana Territory. The Porter Ranch, 10 miles northwest of town. The station master had scratched his head, studying the letters with narrowed eyes. Porter, Porter. There is a Porter Ranch out that way. But I ain't heard nothing about James Porter getting remarried. His wife died some years back, left him with a big spread and no family to speak of. He don't come to town much." "Could you send word to him?" Claire had asked, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. "Could someone ride out to let him know I've arrived?" The station master had looked at the darkening sky, at the snow beginning to fall in earnest. "Not in this weather, miss. Storm's coming in hard. Nobody's riding anywhere tonight. Best you get yourself to Mrs. Hollins's boarding house. Wait it out there. I'm sure there's been some mix-up with the dates. He'll come for you tomorrow, most like." But Clara had no money for a boarding house. She'd spent her last dollars on the train fare, arriving with exactly 15 cents in her purse. Enough for a meal, perhaps, but not lodging. The thought of asking for charity, of explaining to strangers that she was a mail-order bride whose groom had forgotten her, was more than she could bear. So she'd told the station master she would wait. And wait she had, through the afternoon as the storm rolled in, as the temperature dropped, as the other passengers who'd disembarked hurried off to their destinations. A family met by a beaming father, a businessman collected by a driver with a warm carriage, a young couple embracing like they'd been separated for years rather than weeks. Everyone had somewhere to go. Everyone but Clara. Now the platform was empty except for her, and the light was failing fast. The station master's office window glowed with warm yellow lamplight, but Clara couldn't bring herself to go back inside, to face his pity or his irritation. Instead, she stood in the gathering darkness, her teeth beginning to chatter, her hands so numb she could barely feel them anymore. The tears came without permission, freezing on her cheeks before they could fall. She didn't bother wiping them away. What did it matter? She'd gambled everything on the promise of a man she'd never met, and she'd lost. The story of her life, really. Her father had gambled their security away on bad investments and worse business partners. She'd gambled on James Porter's letters being true. Now she would freeze to death on a Montana platform, just another foolish woman who'd believed in fairy tales. "I'm sorry, Mama," she whispered into the storm, thinking of her mother who'd died when Clara was 15, who'd never had to see what became of the family she'd loved. "I'm so sorry." The wind answered with a shriek that sounded almost human. Clara's legs were beginning to shake from cold and exhaustion. She'd been traveling for 6 days, sleeping fitfully on hard train seats, eating crackers and dried apple when she could afford them. The last real meal she'd eaten had been in Chicago 3 days ago. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but the cold made her forget it for long stretches. Now she felt lightheaded, disconnected from her own body, as if she were floating somewhere above the platform watching a stranger freeze. Maybe this was how it happened. Maybe death by cold was like falling asleep. They said it didn't hurt at the end, that you just got tired and lay down and didn't wake up. There were worse ways to die. She was considering sitting down just for a moment's rest when she heard it. Hoofbeats. At first Clara thought she was imagining it, that the cold had finally affected her mind. But the sound grew louder, more distinct, cutting through the storm with rhythmic certainty. Someone was riding hard toward the station. Her heart lurched with sudden, desperate hope. James. It had to be James Porter, finally coming to claim his bride. Perhaps his letter had been delayed, or he'd been caught up with ranch business, or... The rider emerged from the white curtain of snow like an apparition. He was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered and solid, bundled in a heavy sheepskin coat that made him look enormous. The horse beneath him was a massive bay, its breath steaming in the frigid air. Horse and rider were both crusted with snow, suggesting they'd been traveling through the storm for some time. The man pulled up at the platform, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. For a moment, he just sat there, staring at Clara with an expression she couldn't read. Then he swung down from the saddle with practiced ease and took the platform steps 2 at a time. "Good Lord, miss," he said, his voice rough with cold and something that might have been anger or alarm. "How long have you been standing out here?" Clara tried to answer, but her jaw was shaking too hard to form words. She managed something that might have been hours, but sounded more like a whimper. The man didn't wait for clarification. He shrugged out of his sheepskin coat and wrapped it around Clara's shoulders in one swift motion. The coat was warm from his body heat and smelled of horse, leather, and wood smoke. It was the most wonderful thing Clara had ever felt in her life. "I'm Luke Callahan," the man said, his hands briefly steadying her as he adjusted the coat around her. "Foreman at the Porter Ranch. Are you Clara Dawson?" Clara nodded, still unable to speak. Up close she could see his face more clearly, weathered and strong, with deep-set eyes that looked gray or blue in the dim light, and a jaw darkened by several days' worth of stubble. He looked to be in his early 30s, older than James Porter had claimed to be in his letters, but it was hard to tell with men who worked outdoors. The sun and wind aged them. Luke Callahan's expression was grim. He glanced back at the station office, then at Clara's carpetbag, then at Clara herself, and something in his face shifted. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler. "Miss Dawson, I need you to listen to me. I have some difficult news, and I need you to stay calm. Can you do that?" Clara's brief spark of hope died. She knew that tone, that careful gentleness. She'd heard it before, when the doctor had told her father was dead, when the lawyer had explained about the debts, when her landlord had given her notice. It was the voice people used when they were about to destroy your world and wanted to pretend they felt bad about it. "James Porter," she managed through chattering teeth. Is he not coming?" Luke Callahan's jaw tightened. "No, miss. He's not coming. James Porter died 3 days ago. I'm sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry. If we'd known about you, we would have sent word, but we didn't find your letters until this afternoon when I was going through his papers. Soon as I saw the date, I rode straight here." The world tilted. Clara felt her knees buckle, felt herself falling as if through deep water. She was dimly aware of strong arms catching her before she hit the platform, of being held against a broad chest, of Luke Callahan's voice saying her name with increasing urgency. "Miss Dawson, Clara, stay with me now. Don't you dare faint on me. Clara." She fought through the blackness, clawed her way back to consciousness, because some stubborn part of her refused to add swooning to her list of failures. When her vision cleared, she found herself sitting on the platform with Luke Callahan kneeling beside her, one arm around her shoulders to keep her upright, his face creased with concern. "That's it," he said when she focused on him. "Breathe, just breathe. I've got you." "He's dead," Clara whispered. The words felt unreal, impossible. "James Porter is dead." "Yes, miss. Took sick real sudden. Fever and chills. Doc said it was pneumonia. He went fast. I came all this way." Clara heard her own voice from a distance, high and thin and breaking. "I traveled 2,000 miles to marry a dead man. I know, and I'm sorry. Christ, I'm sorry. I have nowhere to go." The admission escaped before she could stop it, shame flooding through her. "I have no money, no family, nothing. I spent everything I had to come here. I thought, Hey." Luke Callahan's voice cut through her spiral, firm but not unkind. "Hey now, look at me." Clara raised her eyes to his. In the fading light, his face was all hard plains and shadows, but his eyes, those gray-blue eyes, were unexpectedly kind. "You're not alone," he said, each word deliberate and clear. "You hear me? You're not alone, and you're not going to freeze or starve or come to any harm. I'll see you safe. That's a promise. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Don't matter. You came here expecting James to honor his word, and he would have if he could have. That makes you part of the Porter Ranch now, whether there's a wedding or not. We take care of our own." Clara wanted to argue, to protest that she wasn't anyone's responsibility, but she was too cold, too exhausted, too utterly defeated. Instead, she just nodded, tears streaming freely now, freezing on her face. Luke stood and pulled her to her feet. "Can you walk?" "I think so." "Good. I'm taking you to Mrs. Hollins's boarding house. It's the warmest place in Silver Ridge, and the widow Hollins won't turn away anyone I bring to her door. You'll have a bed, a hot meal, and a fire. Tomorrow, when you've rested and warmed up, we'll figure out what comes next. But right now, we need to get you out of this cold before you lose your toes." He picked up her carpet bag with one hand and offered her his other arm. Clara took it gratefully, leaning on his strength as they descended the platform steps. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else, wooden and uncooperative. Luke led her to his horse, which had been standing patiently through the entire exchange, its reins simply dropped to the ground. "Can you ride?" he asked. Clara shook her head. "I've never been on a horse." "All right, I'll ride and you'll sit in front of me. It's not far, maybe half a mile to the boarding house, but I don't want you trying to walk it in this weather." Before Clara could protest or worry about propriety, Luke lifted her into the saddle as easily as if she weighed nothing. He tied her carpet bag to the saddle horn, then swung up behind her, his arm coming around her waist to hold her steady. The position was shockingly intimate, his chest pressed against her back, his thighs bracketing hers. But Clara was too cold and too grateful to care about scandal. "Lean back against me," Luke said, his breath warm against her ear. "I won't let you fall." Clara did as she was told, and the horse started forward at an easy walk. Luke kept his arm tight around her waist, holding her secure, and Clara felt the warmth of his body through the sheepskin coat he'd given her, through her own inadequate clothing seeping into her frozen core. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt safe. They rode through the storm in silence. Clara could make out very little through the snow, just the vague shapes of buildings, the glow of lamps and windows, the occasional figure hurrying along the street. Silver Ridge seemed small, nothing more than a few streets of wooden buildings huddled against the Montana wind. Nothing like Boston with its brick and cobblestones and crowds. This was frontier country, raw and harsh and unforgiving. Luke guided the horse with practiced ease, not needing to see clearly, knowing the way by instinct. Clara felt herself relaxing against him despite everything, the rocking rhythm of the horse's gait oddly soothing, the warmth of Luke's body a comfort she hadn't known she needed. "Miss Dawson," Luke said after a few minutes, his voice rumbling through his chest into her back. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Why did you answer James's advertisement? A woman like you, educated, well-spoken, you must have had options back east." Clara laughed, though it came out more like a sob. "That's where you're wrong, Mr. Callahan. I had no options at all. My father died and left me with nothing but debts. I was facing the poorhouse, or worse. James Porter's letters offered hope. I suppose I was foolish to believe in them." "You weren't foolish. James was a good man. He would have kept his promises to you. It's just damn bad luck that he died when he did." "The story of my life," Clara murmured. "Bad luck?" "Well, maybe your luck's about to change." Clara didn't believe that for a moment, but she appreciated Luke Callahan's attempt at optimism. She closed her eyes, letting herself simply exist in the moment, warm, held, safe, knowing it would end soon enough. The boarding house appeared through the snow like a beacon, a two-story structure with lights blazing in every window. Luke pulled up at the front steps and dismounted, then lifted Clara down with the same easy strength he'd shown earlier. Her legs wobbled when her feet touched the ground, and he kept one hand on her elbow until he was sure she wouldn't fall. "Wait here," he said, and took the steps to the front door. He knocked sharply, and within moments, the door flew open. A woman in her 50s appeared, plump and stern-faced, with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. She took one look at Luke, then at Clara shivering on the sidewalk, and her expression transformed from suspicion to concern. "Luke Callahan, what have you brought me?" "A woman in need, Mrs. Hollins. This is Miss Clara Dawson from Boston. She came west to marry James Porter." Mrs. Hollins's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, dear God, James. Luke, we heard about James. Is she—" She didn't know. She arrived on the afternoon train expecting him to meet her. She's been standing on that platform for hours. "I need you to take her in, warm her up, feed her. I'll pay whatever you need." "You'll do no such thing, Mrs. Hollins bustled down the steps, her motherly instincts fully engaged now. She wrapped an arm around Clara's waist and guided her toward the door. "Come inside, dear child. Come in from the cold. Luke Callahan, you bring her bag and then get yourself inside too. You look half frozen yourself." Clara found herself propelled through the door and into the most wonderful warmth she'd ever experienced. The boarding house foyer was small but immaculate, with patterned wallpaper and a runner of red carpet down the hallway. A staircase led up to the second floor, and through an open door on the right, Clara could see a parlor with a fire blazing in the hearth. This way, Mrs. Hollins fussed, leading Clara into the parlor. "Sit right here by the fire. Luke, fetch that quilt from the chair. Miss Dawson, can you tell me your name again? I'm afraid I didn't catch it properly." "Clara," she managed, sinking into the chair Mrs. Hollins indicated. "Clara Dawson. Well, Clara, you're safe now. I'm Martha Hollins, and this is my establishment. You'll stay here as long as you need. Now, let's get you properly warm before we worry about anything else." Luke appeared with the quilt and draped it over Clara's shoulders, adding to the sheepskin coat she still wore. Mrs. Hollins knelt before her and began unlacing Clara's sodden boots, making disapproving sounds at the quality of the leather. "Boston shoes," she muttered. "Pretty enough, but useless out here. Luke, have Ellen bring up hot water for a bath, and tell her to prepare the blue room. It's the warmest. Then have cook make a tray, soup, bread, something substantial." "Yes, ma'am." Luke moved to do her bidding, but paused at the door. "Miss Dawson?" Clara looked up at him. "You rest tonight. Tomorrow I'll come by around midday, and we'll talk about what happens next, all right?" She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Luke tipped his hat to her and left, And suddenly Clara was alone with Mrs. Hollins, who continued her efficient ministrations, peeling off Clara's wet stockings, chafing warmth back into her frozen feet. "That Luke Callahan is a good man," Mrs. Hollins said as she worked. "One of the best I know. If he says he'll help you, he means it. You can trust him." "I don't know him." "No, but I do. Known him since he came to Silver Ridge 8 years ago. He's a man of his word." Mrs. Hollins looked up at Clara, her eyes shrewd but kind. "Now, dear, I need you to tell me truthfully. Are you hurt anywhere? Did anyone harm you?" "No, I'm just cold and tired and lost," Mrs. Hollins finished gently. "Yes, I imagine you are. Well, we'll see about finding you again, one step at a time." A young woman appeared in the doorway, Ellen, presumably, with news that the bath was being prepared. Mrs. Hollins helped Clara to her feet and guided her upstairs to a small but cheerful bedroom with blue wallpaper and white curtains. A copper tub had been placed before the fireplace, and Ellen was pouring steaming water into it from large kettles. "I'll leave you to bathe," Mrs. Hollins said. "There's soap there on the table and towels. Take your time, the water will stay warm. I'll have Ellen bring your supper up in about 30 minutes. Will that suffice?" "Mrs. Hollins," Clara said, her voice breaking, "I can't pay you. I have 15 cents to my name. I don't know when I'll be able to—" "Hush," the older woman's voice was firm. "Money is the least of your worries right now. We'll sort everything out tomorrow. Tonight, you bathe, you eat, and you sleep. Those are your only jobs. Understood?" Clara nodded, tears spilling over again. She was so tired of crying, but she couldn't seem to stop. Mrs. Hollins patted her cheek. "You've been very brave, my dear. But you don't have to be brave anymore. Not tonight." Then she and Ellen left, closing the door softly behind them, and Clara was alone. She stood in the warm room for a long moment, unable to quite believe she was here, that she was safe. The tub steamed invitingly, and her body ached with cold and exhaustion. Moving as if in a dream, Clara undressed, peeling off layers of damp clothing until she stood naked in the firelight. She stepped into the tub and sank into the hot water with a gasp of pure relief. The heat was almost painful at first, making her cold, deadened skin prickle and burn. But she endured it, gradually submerging herself until only her face remained above the water. For the first time in days, weeks, maybe, Clara allowed herself to simply feel the fear, the grief, the bone-deep weariness of the journey, the shame of her circumstances, the terror of those hours on the platform, believing she would die alone in the snow, the strange, overwhelming gratitude toward a man she didn't know who had appeared out of the storm like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to pray. Luke Callahan. She pictured his face, weathered and strong, with those kind gray-blue eyes. He'd called her Miss and wrapped her in his coat without hesitation. He'd promised she wouldn't be alone. And foolishly, impossibly, Clara found herself wanting to believe him. She washed herself with the soap Mrs. Hollins had provided, plain yellow soap that smelled faintly of lye and lavender. She scrubbed away days of train grime, washed her hair, let the hot water soak warmth back into her frozen bones. By the time she climbed out of the tub, she felt almost human again. She dried herself with the towels and wrapped one around her body, then opened her carpet bag to find her nightgown. As she rummaged through her belongings, her hand closed on the packet of letters from James Porter. She pulled them out and stood holding them, staring at the neat handwriting. Dead. James Porter was dead, and with him every plan Clara had made, every hope she'd carried west. A knock at the door made her jump. "Miss Dawson?" It was Ellen's voice. "I have your supper." Clara quickly pulled on her nightgown and her dressing gown over it, then opened the door. Ellen entered with a tray laden with more food than Clara could possibly eat. A large bowl of stew rich with meat and vegetables, thick slices of bread still warm from the oven, butter, a pot of tea, and even a slice of apple pie. "Mrs. Hollins says you're to eat all of it," Ellen said, setting the tray on the small table by the window. "She says you look half-starved, and she won't have it said that anyone went hungry under her roof." "Thank you," Claire whispered. Ellen smiled, a young, pretty smile, and left. Clara sat at the table and ate. The stew was the best thing she'd ever tasted, rich and savory and hot. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, feeling strength return to her body with every swallow. She finished the stew, ate half the bread, drank 2 cups of tea. The pies she saved for later, some part of her still hoarding resources against future need. When she couldn't eat anymore, Clara climbed into the bed. The sheets were clean and smelled of lavender. The quilts were thick and warm. The pillow was soft beneath her head. She should have fallen asleep instantly, exhausted as she was. But instead she lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had brought her to this moment. Her father's death, the creditors, the fear, James Porter's letters, the hope they'd kindled, the long journey west, the expectations, the empty platform, the cold, the certainty of death. And then Luke Callahan, appearing out of the storm like some kind of rough-hewn angel, wrapping her in warmth and promising safety. "You're not alone," he'd said. Clara closed her eyes and let herself believe it, just for tonight. Tomorrow would bring new worries, new fears, new impossible decisions. But tonight, she was warm and fed and safe. Tonight, that was enough. Outside, the storm raged on, but Clara Dawson slept deeply and dreamlessly for the first time since leaving Boston, wrapped in blankets in a strange boarding house in a frontier town at the edge of the Montana wilderness. And for reasons she couldn't quite explain, she felt the faintest stirring of something that might have been hope. Retry PQ Part 2. Louis Potts, Viet 9000-9502 liên kết liên mật với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, phá hủy thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liên mật khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liên mạch với phần trước, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ. Phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ đồ kịch tính không Việt lan man, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang Document Part 2. Clara woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the disorienting sensation of not knowing where she was. For a moment, she lay perfectly still, her mind struggling to place herself in this room with its blue wallpaper and white curtains, this soft bed with its lavender-scented sheets. Then, memory crashed over her like a wave. The platform, the cold, James Porter's death, Luke Callahan emerging from the storm, and she sat up abruptly, her heart pounding. The events of the previous night seemed almost dreamlike in the clear light of morning. Had it really happened? Had she truly stood on that platform for hours, half frozen and alone? Had a stranger really wrapped her in his coat and brought her to safety? Clara looked around the room and found evidence that it had all been real. Her traveling clothes hung over a chair near the fireplace, still damp in places. Her carpetbag sat on the floor beside the wardrobe, and draped over the foot of the bed was Luke Callahan's sheepskin coat, which she must have been too exhausted to return last night. She reached out and touched the coat, feeling the worn softness of the leather, the thick wool lining still holding a faint warmth. It was real. All of it had been real. A knock at the door made her pull her hand back guiltily. "Miss Dawson?" It was Mrs. Holland's voice, warm and matter-of-fact. "Are you awake, dear?" "Yes, ma'am." "May I come in?" "Of course." Mrs. Hollins entered carrying a tray with what looked like breakfast, porridge, toast, eggs, and coffee. The older woman was dressed in a practical gray dress with a white apron, her hair already neatly pinned, looking as though she'd been up for hours. "Good morning," she said, setting the tray on the table. "I hope you slept well. You certainly needed it. I checked on you twice during the night, and you didn't stir either time." "I slept deeply," Clara admitted. "I can't remember the last time I slept so well. Mrs. Hollins, I don't know how to thank you for—" "By eating this breakfast and not worrying about thanks," Mrs. Hollins interrupted briskly. "Now, I've taken the liberty of pressing your dress. The green one seemed the least travel-worn. I thought you might want to look presentable when Luke Callahan comes calling this afternoon." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "He's really coming back?" "He said he would, didn't he? Luke Callahan doesn't make promises he can't keep." Mrs. Hollins moved to the wardrobe and withdrew Clara's green wool dress, which did indeed look freshly pressed. "I also took the liberty of examining your other garments.
I hope you don't think me presumptuous, but my dear, your wardrobe is not suited for Montana winters. We'll need to do something about that. I have no money to... Yes, you told me that last night. Mrs. Hollins waved a dismissive hand. We'll sort it out. Now, you eat while the food is hot. I'll send Ellen up in an hour to help you dress and fix your hair. Luke said he'd be here around noon, which gives us plenty of time to make you presentable. Mrs. Hollins left before Clara could protest further, and Clara found herself alone with the breakfast tray. Her stomach growled at the sight of food, and she realized she was ravenously hungry. She ate everything Mrs. Hollins had brought, savoring the simple but well-prepared meal. The coffee was strong and hot, chasing away the last cobwebs of sleep. When she finished eating, Clara rose and went to the window. The storm had passed during the night, leaving Silver Ridge blanketed in fresh snow that sparkled in the morning sun. From her second-floor vantage point, she could see most of the town. A single main street with wooden buildings on either side, a church with a white steeple, what looked like a general store, a saloon, a bank. Beyond the town, the Montana landscape stretched endlessly, rolling hills covered in snow, mountains rising in the distance like sentinels. It was beautiful in a stark, harsh way. Nothing like Boston with its brick buildings and crowded streets and centuries of civilization pressing down on everything. This was raw country, new country, where the edges of things were still being determined. Clara touched her fingers to the cold window pane and wondered what on earth she was going to do. She had no husband, no home, no prospects. She had 15 cents in her purse and a carpet bag full of inadequate clothing. Luke Callahan had promised to help her, but what could he really do? Find her a position as a maid? Send her back east on charity? The thought of returning to Boston with her tail between her legs, admitting defeat, was almost unbearable. But staying here, in a town where she knew no one and had no place, that seemed equally impossible. Ellen arrived an hour later, as promised, cheerful and chatty. She helped Clara wash with fresh water from the pitcher, then assisted her into the green dress, doing up the endless row of buttons down the back. While Clara sat at the small dressing table, Ellen brushed out her dark hair, which had dried in unruly waves overnight. "You have beautiful hair, miss," Ellen said, working through a tangle with gentle fingers. "Thick and shiny. Wish mine was half so nice. Mine's thin as corn silk and won't hold a curl to save its life." "Thank you," Clara murmured, watching in the mirror as Ellen worked. "Mrs. Hollins says you came to marry Mr. Porter," Ellen continued, her voice softening with sympathy. "I'm awful sorry about what happened. That must have been quite a shock." "Yes." "Did you know him well, Mr. Porter, I mean?" "I never met him. We corresponded by letter." "Oh." Ellen was quiet for a moment, perhaps trying to imagine traveling across the country to marry a stranger. "Well, I'm sure Mr. Callahan will help you sort things out. He's a good man, Mr. Callahan is. Fair and honest, and handsome, if you don't mind my saying." She giggled a little, as if she'd shared a secret. Clara felt her cheeks warm again. She hadn't thought of Luke Callahan in those terms. She'd been too cold and terrified last night to notice much beyond his kindness. But now that Ellen mentioned it, Clara supposed he was handsome in a rough-hewn way, with his weathered face and strong jaw and those unexpectedly kind eyes. "I barely know him," Clara said, keeping her voice neutral. "Well, you'll get to know him better today, I expect." Ellen pinned Clara's hair up in a simple but elegant style, leaving a few soft tendrils framing her face. "There now, you look lovely, like a proper lady." Clara studied her reflection. The woman in the mirror looked tired, with shadows under her eyes and a certain tightness around her mouth. But Ellen was right. She looked presentable, respectable, not like someone who'd nearly frozen to death on a train platform less than 24 hours ago. "Thank you, Ellen." "You're welcome, miss. Now, Mrs. Hollins says you're to come down to the parlor and wait there. Mr. Callahan should be along shortly." Clara descended the stairs with Ellen, her heart beating faster with each step. The boarding house looked different in daylight, still immaculate, but homier somehow, with family photographs on the walls and embroidered samplers with Bible verses. She could hear voices from somewhere deeper in the house, the clatter of dishes, the ordinary sounds of a household going about its day. The parlor was empty when Clara entered, though the fire had been built up to chase away the morning chill. She sat in the chair she'd occupied last night, folding her hands in her lap, trying to calm her nerves.
What would Luke Callahan say today? What solutions could he possibly offer? She didn't have long to wonder. Within 10 minutes, she heard the front door open, heard Mrs. Hollins's voice greeting someone, and then Luke Callahan appeared in the parlor doorway. He looked different in daylight, cleaner for one thing. He'd obviously bathed and shaved since last night. His dark hair was still damp, slicked back from his face. He wore clean work clothes, canvas pants, a flannel shirt, a leather vest, and carried his hat in his hands. Without the sheepskin coat and the coating of snow, Clara could see him more clearly. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscled build of a man who did hard physical labor every day. His face was all angles and planes, weathered by sun and wind, and his eyes, yes, they were blue-gray, like a winter sky, were watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Miss Dawson," he said, his voice as rough and warm as she remembered. "I hope you slept well." "I did, thank you. And please call me Clara. After everything you did for me last night, formality seems rather unnecessary." Something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. "Clara, then. And you can call me Luke. Mind if I sit?" "Of course not. It's not my parlor." Luke took the chair opposite hers, setting his hat on the small table between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Clara found herself studying him, noting details she'd missed last night. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the calluses on his hands. The way he sat, relaxed but alert, like a man accustomed to watching his surroundings. "I brought your coat back," Clara said, breaking the silence. "Well, it's upstairs in my room. I should have brought it down with me. I'm sorry." "Keep it," Luke said. "At least until we can get you something warmer. That cloak you were wearing yesterday won't do you much good out here." "I can't keep your coat. You'll need it." "I have others, and you need it more than I do." His tone was gentle but firm, brooking no argument. "Now, I expect you have questions about what happens next. I have some thoughts on that, but I'd like to hear from you first. What do you want to do, Clara?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her what she wanted in months. Everything had been about necessity, about survival, about making the best of impossible situations. "I don't know," she admitted. "I suppose I should return to Boston, but I have no money for a ticket. I would need to work here for a while, save enough for passage back east. But I don't know what kind of work I could do. I have no skills that seem useful in a place like this. I can read and write and do sums. I can manage a household. I can play the piano and do needlework and make polite conversation, but those things don't seem very valuable on the frontier." Luke listened without interrupting, his blue-gray eyes steady on her face. When she fell silent, he leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. "Can I tell you what I see when I look at you?" he asked. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. "I see a woman with enough courage to travel 2,000 miles to start a new life. I see someone who stood on a freezing platform for hours rather than impose on strangers. I see someone who's educated and well-spoken and clearly has a good head on her shoulders. Those things are valuable anywhere, Clara, especially here." She felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "That's kind of you to say, but it's not kindness, it's truth. Now, here's what I'm proposing. The Porter Ranch is in a difficult position right now. James died without a will, without any family we know of. The property will likely end up in probate, which could take months. In the meantime, someone needs to manage the household, keep the books, make sure things keep running. Samuel, he's the ranch cook. He's getting on in years and can't do everything himself. And Edith Harper, who's been James's friend and neighbor, she's been helping out, but she has her own place to manage." Clara's heart began to beat faster. "Are you offering me a position?" "I'm offering you a choice," Luke corrected. "You could come out to the ranch, take on the role of housekeeper until spring. You'd have your own room, board, and a wage. Not a lot, the ranch finances are tight, but enough to save for a ticket back east if that's what you decide you want. Or enough to start fresh somewhere else. Either way, you'd have time to figure things out, and you wouldn't be beholden to anyone's charity." "Why would you do this?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you help me this way?" Luke was quiet for a moment, his gaze dropping to his hands. When he spoke, his voice was lower, rougher. "Because 6 years ago, my younger sister found herself in a situation not unlike yours. She was engaged to a man who turned out to be no good. When she broke off the engagement, she had nowhere to go. She wrote to me, asking for help, but I was deployed with the army out west, and her letters didn't reach me for months. By the time I got them and made it back east, she'd already... He stopped, his jaw tightening. She'd already married a man who treated her badly just because she didn't see another option.
She died 2 years ago in childbirth, and I'll always wonder if things might have been different if someone had helped her when she needed it. Clara's throat tightened with sympathy. Luke, I'm so sorry. Point is, Luke continued, looking up at her with those steady blue-gray eyes, I can't help my sister anymore, but I can help you, and James would have wanted me to. He was a good man, Clara. He would have been a good husband to you. The least I can do is make sure his death doesn't ruin your life the way it might have. Clara sat very still, absorbing this. She'd come west expecting to be someone's wife, to have her role in place clearly defined. Instead, she was being offered something different. Not marriage, but honest work. Not charity, but opportunity. It wasn't what she'd planned, but perhaps it was better. At least this way she'd have time to catch her breath, to decide her own future. What about propriety? She asked.
If I'm living at the ranch, unchaperoned, Edith Harper's planning to stay on for a while, Luke said. She's a widow, respectable as they come. She'll be there most days, and she can stay overnight when needed. And Samuel's been at the ranch for 20 years. No one would dare say a word against his presence or mine with him there. We'll keep everything above board. How far is the ranch from town? About 10 miles. It's a good ride when the weather's clear, maybe an hour. In winter, it can take longer. But we come to town at least once a week for supplies, and you'd be welcome to come along any time you want. Clara looked down at her hands, considering. She could refuse, could insist on finding work here in town where things might be easier, more civilized. But the truth was that Luke's offer was more generous than anything she had a right to expect. Room, board, wages, and time. Time to heal, to think, to decide what she wanted from her life instead of just accepting what circumstances forced upon her. All right, she said, looking up at him. I'll come to the ranch. I'll work as your housekeeper until spring, and then we'll see what comes next. But I have conditions. Luke's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. Name them. First, I want a fair wage. I won't accept charity disguised as employment. If I'm doing the work, I expect to be paid what it's worth. Agreed. $20 a month plus room and board. That's fair for ranch work. Clara did quick calculations in her head. $20 a month for 3 months would give her $60. More than enough for a train ticket back east with some left over. It was generous, perhaps too generous, but she wasn't going to argue. Second condition, if at any point I decide to leave, I can do so without obligation. I won't be trapped.
You'll never be trapped, Luke said quietly. You'll always be free to leave if that's what you want. Third condition, I want honesty. If there are problems at the ranch, financial troubles, anything I should know, I want to be told. I've been lied to enough in my life. I won't tolerate it anymore, even well-intentioned lies. Fair enough? I'll be straight with you, always. Anything else? Clara thought for a moment, then shook her head. No, those are my conditions. Luke stood and extended his hand. Then we have an agreement. Welcome to the Porter Ranch, Clara Dawson. Clara stood and took his hand, feeling the strength and warmth of his grip. His hand engulfed hers, rough with calluses, and the handshake felt more binding than any contract she could have signed. When do I start? She asked. How about tomorrow? That'll give you today to rest up and say goodbye to Mrs. Hollins. I'll come fetch you mid-morning, and we'll ride out to the ranch together.
I'll bring a gentler horse than the one I had yesterday, something suitable for a beginning rider. I'll be ready. Luke picked up his hat and turned to go, then paused at the doorway. Clara? Yes? Thank you for saying yes, for taking a chance on this. I know it's not what you came out here for, but I hope, it might turn out all right. I hope so too, Clara said, and realized she meant it. After Luke left, Mrs. Hollins appeared in the parlor doorway, her expression curious. Well, what did he say? He offered me a position at the ranch. As housekeeper, I accepted. Did you now? Mrs. Hollins studied Clara with shrewd eyes. And do you think that's wise, going off to a ranch with a man you barely know? He said Mrs. Harper will be there, and the cook, Samuel, and I'll have my own room. Everything will be proper.
Oh, I don't doubt Luke Callahan's honor, Mrs. Holland said. That boy's got more integrity than half the preachers I've known. I'm more concerned about you, dear. You've had quite a shock. Are you sure you're thinking clearly? Clara sank back into her chair, suddenly exhausted. I don't know. Maybe not. But what choice do I have? I can't stay here indefinitely on charity. I need to work, to earn money, to have time to figure out what comes next. Luke's offer gives me that. It seems like the best option I'm likely to get. Mrs. Hollins was quiet for a moment, then nodded. You're probably right, and Luke will look after you. I'm certain of that. He's a good man who's known his share of hardship. That makes him kind to others who are struggling. She moved into the room and sat down across from Clara. Can I tell you something about Luke Callahan? Please. He came to Silver Ridge 8 years ago, right after his Army service ended. He didn't talk much about what he'd seen or done, but you could tell the war had marked him.
He took the foreman position at Porter Ranch and worked harder than any two men combined. James Porter always said Luke saved the ranch, turned it profitable when it had been struggling. But Luke never asked for more than his wage and a place to sleep. He sends most of his money back east to his mother. I know because I've handled the bank drafts for him when he's needed help with the paperwork. He told me about his sister, Clara said softly. Did he? Mrs. Hollins looked surprised. He doesn't usually speak of her. Her death hit him hard. He blamed himself, though it wasn't his fault. Sometimes I think he throws himself into work so he doesn't have to think about it too much. She paused, choosing her words carefully. What I'm trying to say is that Luke's offer to help you, it's genuine. He's not the kind of man who plays games or has hidden motives. If he says he'll look after you, he will. But don't mistake his kindness for something it isn't. Luke Callahan's a good man, but he's also a broken one in some ways. He's not looking for romance or companionship beyond friendship. He's looking to make amends for the past. Clara absorbed this, feeling both reassured and oddly disappointed, though she couldn't say why. I'm not looking for romance either, she said. I came west for a marriage of convenience, not a love match. What I need now is stability and time. Luke's offering that, and I'm grateful. Good. As long as you both understand what this is and isn't, you'll do fine. Mrs. Holland stood, smoothing her apron. Now, let's talk about practical matters. Your wardrobe needs attention, as I mentioned this morning. You can't survive a Montana winter in those flimsy things you brought from Boston. I told you I have no money, and I told you we'd sort it out. I have some things in storage, my daughter's clothes, from before she married and moved to Oregon. She was about your size, and she left behind several wool dresses and a proper winter coat. You're welcome to them. Mrs. Hollins, I couldn't. You can and you will. What good are those clothes doing anyone gathering dust in my attic? Besides, you'll pay me back when you can. I'm not worried. Mrs. Hollins gave Clara a stern look that somehow also managed to be kind. Learn to accept help when it's offered, dear. Pride is well and good, but it won't keep you warm. Clara felt her eyes sting with tears again. You've been so kind to me, you and Luke both. I don't understand why. Because you needed help, and we were able to give it. That's how things work out here, Clara. The frontier is hard enough without everyone trying to survive alone. We help each other when we can, knowing we might need help ourselves someday. Mrs. Hollins patted Clara's shoulder. Now let's go up to the attic and see about those clothes. And then I want you to rest this afternoon. You've got a big day tomorrow. The rest of that day passed in a blur of activity. Mrs. Hollins produced an astonishing array of warm clothing from her attic. Wool dresses in practical colors, flannel petticoats, thick stockings, a heavy winter coat lined with fur, even sturdy leather boots that fit Clara reasonably well with an extra pair of socks. Clara protested each item, but Mrs. Hollins was implacable, insisting that every piece was necessary for survival in Montana. I'll not have you catching your death out at that ranch, the older woman declared. You'll take these clothes, and you'll wear them, and you'll thank me by staying alive and well. That's all the payment I need. By evening, Clara's carpetbag had been supplemented with a small trunk containing her new wardrobe. Ellen had helped her pack, chattering about the ranch and what Clara might expect there. I've never been to Porter Ranch myself, Ellen said, folding a flannel petticoat carefully. But I've heard it's a beautiful place. Big house, lots of land. Mr. Porter built it for his wife before she died. Some folks say the house is haunted by her ghost, but that's probably just silly talk." "Haunted?" Clara repeated, feeling a chill. "Oh, don't pay me any mind. People like to tell stories, especially about wealthy folks living alone. I'm sure there's nothing to it. Besides, you'll have Mr. Callahan there, and Samuel, and Mrs. Harper. You won't be lonely." That night, Clara lay awake in the blue bedroom for a long time, watching shadows dance on the ceiling and thinking about ghosts. Not the spectral kind that Ellen had mentioned, but the ghosts of expectations and dreams. She'd come west to become Mrs. James Porter, to have a home and a husband and a clearly defined role in life. Instead, she would be Clara Dawson, housekeeper, employee, a woman making her own way. It wasn't what she'd planned. But perhaps, Clara thought, as sleep finally began to claim her, it might be better. At least this way, her future belonged to her. Morning came too quickly. Clara woke to Ellen tapping at her door, announcing that breakfast was ready and Mr. Callahan would arrive within the hour. Clara dressed quickly in one of her new wool dresses, a deep green that was warmer and more practical than anything she'd owned in Boston, and went downstairs. Mrs. Hollins had prepared a substantial breakfast, insisting that Clara would need her strength for the ride ahead. As Clara ate, the older woman fussed around her, checking that she had everything she needed, that the trunk was properly packed, that Clara knew she could return any time if things didn't work out at the ranch. "You're not abandoning me to wolves," Clara said, trying to lighten the mood. "I'm only going 10 miles away." 10 miles in winter might as well be 100, Mrs. Hollins replied. "But you're right. I'm fussing too much. It's just that I've grown fond of you in these 2 short days, and I want to see you happy." "I'm not sure I remember what happy feels like," Clara admitted, "but I think I might be able to find out, given time." Luke arrived promptly at 10 o'clock, riding the big bay Clara remembered from their first meeting and leading a smaller chestnut mare with a gentle eye. He dismounted and came to the door, exchanging greetings with Mrs. Hollins before turning to Clara. "Ready?" he asked. Clara took a deep breath. "Ready." Luke loaded her carpet bag and trunk onto the bay with practiced efficiency, securing them with ropes. Then he helped Clara into the saddle of the chestnut mare, adjusting the stirrups to fit her shorter legs. "Her name's Rosie," Luke said, patting the mare's neck. "She's the gentlest horse we've got. Just hold the reins lightly and let her follow my horse. She knows the way home." Clara settled into the saddle, feeling awkward and conspicuous. She'd never ridden a horse before yesterday, and even that had been with Luke holding her safely in front of him. Now she was expected to ride alone, and the ground seemed terrifyingly far away. "I'll be right beside you the whole way," Luke said, as if reading her fear. "If you feel unsteady, just tell me and we'll stop, all right?" Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. They set off through Silver Ridge with Mrs. Hollins and Ellen waving from the boarding house porch. The town was busy with morning activity, men heading to work, women shopping at the general store, children playing in the snow. Several people called greetings to Luke, and more than a few curious glances were directed at Clara. She kept her eyes forward, focusing on staying balanced in the saddle. Once they left town, the landscape opened up around them. The snow-covered prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by occasional stands of trees and the distant mountains. The sky was impossibly blue, the air so cold and clear it hurt to breathe. Rosie plodded along steadily, her breath steaming, following Luke's bay without needing guidance. They rode in silence for a while, Clara concentrating on the rhythm of the horse's gait, gradually relaxing as she realized she wasn't going to fall off. The countryside was beautiful in a stark way, all white snow and dark trees and brilliant sky, so different from Boston with its crowds and buildings and noise. "You're doing well," Luke said after a while, glancing over at her. "Natural seat. Most people are stiff as boards their first time on a horse." "I'm terrified," Clara admitted. "I'm just good at hiding it." Luke's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Fair enough. Fear's not a bad thing out here. Keeps you careful. It's when people get overconfident that they make dangerous mistakes." "Is that what happened to you?" Clara asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "I'm sorry. That was intrusive." "No, it's all right. You mean the scar?" Luke touched his eyebrow briefly. "That happened during the war. My unit was ambushed and I got too cocky, Thought I could take on 3 Confederate soldiers by myself. Turns out I couldn't. I survived, obviously, but I learned a valuable lesson about overconfidence. You were in the war? 4 years. Enlisted in 61, mustered out in 65. Spent another 3 years with the Army out west before I'd had enough of military life and settled here. Clara wanted to ask more. What he'd seen, what he'd done, whether the war haunted him the way it seemed to haunt so many veterans. But she sensed those were questions for later, if ever. Instead, she said, "Mrs. Hollins told me you've been at Porter Ranch for 8 years. You must know it well. Better than anywhere else I've lived. James gave me a job when I needed one, and I worked hard to make the ranch succeed. We were partners in everything but name." Luke's expression darkened slightly. His death, it's still hard to believe. 3 days ago he was working cattle with me. Then he took sick that evening, and by morning he could barely breathe. Doc came out, said it was pneumonia, gave him medicine, but nothing helped. He died the next night. He paused. It was fast, at least. He didn't suffer long. Had he been ill before? Not that I knew. He was strong, healthy, only 46 years old. Sometimes death just comes, I guess, no matter how careful you are. They rode on through the crystal morning, and gradually Clara found herself relaxing, even enjoying the sensation of being on horseback, of moving through this vast landscape. The air was cold but invigorating, and the sun was warm on her face. She could see why people came west, despite the hardships. There was a freedom here, a sense of possibility that didn't exist in the crowded, settled east. After about an hour, Luke pointed ahead. There, that's Porter Ranch. Clara looked where he indicated and saw buildings in the distance. A large house, several barns and outbuildings, corrals with horses and cattle. As they drew closer, she could make out more details. The house was 2 stories, built of wood painted white, with a wide porch wrapping around the front and side. It was larger and finer than she'd expected, more mansion than ranch house. Someone had built it with care and pride. James built that house for his wife, Mary, Luke said quietly. She died of fever 5 years ago, never got to enjoy it for long. He kept it nice, though, kept everything just the way she'd liked it, said it made him feel closer to her. They rode into the ranch yard, and immediately a large yellow dog came bounding out from the barn, barking joyfully. Behind the dog came an older man, bow-legged and weathered, wiping his hands on his apron. "That's Samuel," Luke said. "Samuel, come meet Miss Dawson." Samuel approached as they dismounted, his weathered face breaking into a welcoming smile. He was perhaps 60, with more white than gray in his hair, and the kind of lean, wiry build that came from a lifetime of hard work. "Miss Dawson, welcome to Porter Ranch," Samuel said, his voice gravelly but warm. "We're mighty glad to have you here. House has been too quiet since Mr. James passed." "Thank you, Samuel. Please, call me Clara." "Clara it is. Now, let me help with those bags. You must be half frozen from the ride." Between the 3 of them, they got Clara's belongings into the house. The front door opened into a spacious entry hall with a staircase leading up to the 2nd floor. To the left was a parlor, beautifully furnished with upholstered chairs, a settee, and a piano in the corner. To the right was a dining room with a long table that could seat 12. Everywhere Clara looked, she saw evidence of care and taste. Good furniture, nice curtains, oil lamps with painted glass shades. James's wife, Mary, she had refined tastes, Luke explained, watching Clara take it all in. She came from money back east, brought a lot of her things with her when they married. James kept everything exactly how she arranged it. Samuel led them through the house, showing Clara the kitchen, the pantry, the washroom. Then they climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor, where there were 5 bedrooms. Samuel opened the door to one near the front of the house. "This was Mary's sewing room," he said. "We figured it'd do well for you. It's got a good stove, plenty of light, and a nice view of the front approach." The room was lovely, larger than Clara's room at the boarding house, with a brass bed covered in a colorful quilt, a wardrobe, a dressing table, and a comfortable chair by the window. Someone had already laid a fire in the small stove, and the room was warm and welcoming. "It's perfect," Clara said, feeling tears threaten again. "Thank you. I'll let you get settled," Luke said from the doorway. "Samuel will show you around the rest of the house, explain how things work. We usually eat supper around 6. I'll be in the barn if you need anything before then." He left, and Clara found herself alone in her new room, surrounded by her meager belongings. She went to the window and looked out at the ranch spread below, the barns, the corrals, the endless white prairie beyond. In the distance, she could see Luke walking toward the barn, the yellow dog trotting at his heels. This was her life now, this ranch, these people, this vast Montana landscape. Clara unpacked her trunk slowly, hanging her new dresses in the wardrobe, arranging her few personal items on the dressing table. Her mother's Bible she placed on the small table beside the bed. The silver hairbrush went on the dressing table. The letters from James Porter she tucked into the back of a drawer, unable to throw them away but not wanting to look at them. When everything was arranged to her satisfaction, Clara went downstairs to find Samuel in the kitchen, preparing what looked like preparations for supper. "Can I help?" she asked. Samuel looked up, surprised. "Well, that's kind of you, but you just got here. Don't you want to rest?" "I've been resting for 2 days. I'd rather make myself useful. Besides, if I'm to be housekeeper here, I should start learning how things work." Samuel's weathered face creased in a smile. "Fair enough. Can you make biscuits?" "I can." "Then you can start on those while I deal with this venison. We'll have a proper supper tonight, something to mark your first day at Porter Ranch." Clara rolled up her sleeves and set to work, finding comfort in the familiar tasks of measuring flour and cutting butter. As she worked, Samuel told her about the ranch, how many head of cattle they ran, where the property lines were, which neighbors were friendly and which were difficult. He spoke fondly of James Porter, calling him Mr. James, and telling stories that painted a picture of a fair, hard-working man who'd cared deeply about his ranch and the people who worked for him. "He would have been good to you, Shum," Samuel said at one point, his voice rough with emotion. "He was lonely after Miss Mary died. But he would have been a good husband. I'm sorry you didn't get the chance to find that out." "So am I," Clara said softly. They worked in companionable silence after that, and by the time 6 o'clock rolled around, they had a fine supper prepared: venison steaks, biscuits, gravy, canned vegetables from the summer garden, and dried apple pie. Clara helped Samuel set the table in the dining room, using the good china that had belonged to Mary Porter. Luke came in at 6 exactly, freshly washed, his hair still damp. He looked surprised and pleased at the spread on the table. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble," he said. "It's no trouble," Clara replied. "Besides, Samuel did most of the work. I just helped." They sat down to eat, the three of them at one end of the long table that suddenly felt too big and too empty. Clara could almost see the ghosts of dinner parties past, when James and Mary Porter had entertained friends and neighbors, when the house had been full of life and laughter. The meal was good, the conversation quiet. Luke asked Clara if her room was satisfactory, if she needed anything else. Samuel told a funny story about the yellow dog, whose name Clara learned was Jasper, chasing a skunk and coming off much the worse for the encounter. They carefully avoided mentioning James Porter, though his absence hung over the meal like a shroud. After supper, Clara insisted on helping with the dishes despite Samuel's protests. Luke disappeared back outside to check on the livestock one final time, and Samuel showed Clara where everything belonged in the kitchen. "You're going to fit in just fine here," Samuel said as they worked. "I can tell. You've got a good way about you, practical but kind. That's what this place needs right now." "I hope you're right," Clara said. When the kitchen was clean and Samuel had retired to his small room off the kitchen, Clara found herself alone in the big house. She wandered through the downstairs rooms, touching things lightly: the piano keys, the books on the shelves, the photographs on the mantel showing James and Mary Porter in happier times. She ended up in the parlor, standing before the piano. On impulse, she sat down at the bench and lifted the cover from the keys. The piano was slightly out of tune, but still playable. Clara's fingers found the keys almost automatically, playing a simple melody her mother had taught her years ago. The music filled the room, sad and sweet, and Clara played until tears blurred her vision and she had to stop. That was beautiful. Clara jumped, startled. Luke stood in the parlor doorway, his hat in his hands, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "I'm sorry," Clara said, wiping at her eyes. "I should have asked permission before. No need to apologize. Mary used to play too. It's good to hear music in this house again." Luke moved into the room, stopping a respectful distance away.
Are you all right, Clara? I don't know, she admitted. I keep thinking about how different everything is from what I expected. I should be married right now, settling into being Mrs. James Porter. Instead, She gestured helplessly. Instead, you're free, Luke said quietly. Free to make your own choices, chart your own course. That's not nothing, Clara. That's actually something pretty rare, especially for women. Clara looked at him, this rough-hewn cowboy who kept surprising her with his insight. Is that how you see it? Freedom? It's how I try to see most things. Life throws curves at all of us. The question is what we do with them. Luke turned his hat in his hands, seeming to choose his words carefully. You could see this as a tragedy, the death of your plans, the loss of your expected future, or you could see it as an opportunity, a chance to discover what you really want instead of what circumstances force on you. Either way, the reality is the same. It's just about how you frame it in your own mind. That's almost philosophical, Mr. Callahan. Luke, he corrected with a faint smile. And I had a lot of time to think during the war and after. Saw a lot of men break under the weight of their circumstances. The ones who survived, really survived, not just stayed alive, were the ones who could find meaning in the chaos, who could adapt instead of just endure. Clara thought about this, about framing and meaning and adaptation. Maybe he was right. Maybe she could choose to see this not as a disaster, but as a beginning. Thank you, she said finally, for everything, for saving me on that platform, for bringing me here, for giving me time to figure things out. I won't forget your kindness. You don't need to thank me. Just make yourself at home here. This is your place now for as long as you need it. After Luke left, Clara sat at the piano for a long time, not playing, just thinking. Outside, darkness had fallen over the Montana prairie, and the wind picked up, rattling the windows. But inside the house it was warm and quiet, and for the first time since leaving Boston, Clara felt something that might have been peace, or at least the possibility of it. She climbed the stairs to her room eventually, banked the fire in her stove, changed into her nightgown. As she lay in the darkness, listening to the wind and the unfamiliar creaks and settle of a strange house, Clara realized that she was no longer afraid. Uncertain, yes, but not afraid. Whatever came next, she would face it. She'd survived the journey west, survived being abandoned, survived a night that could have killed her. She'd survived, and that meant something. Tomorrow, she would begin her work as housekeeper, would start learning the rhythms and routines of ranch life. Tomorrow, she would begin building a new life from the ruins of her old one. But tonight, Clara Dawson closed her eyes and slept soundly in her room at Porter Ranch, while outside the Montana wind sang songs of winter and endurance, and somewhere in the darkness, Luke Callahan checked the locks on the barn doors and thought about courage and second chances. Retry PQ, Part 3. Louis. Viet 9000, 9500, two liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện và hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới, liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ ba, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau.
Louis trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhạy sang document, Part 3. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern that Clara found surprisingly comforting. She rose each morning before dawn, dressed in the practical wool clothing Mrs. Hollins had given her, and went downstairs to help Samuel prepare breakfast. Luke would come in from the barn at 6:30, stamping snow from his boots, his face ruddy from the cold. They would eat together at the kitchen table rather than the formal dining room, eggs, bacon, biscuits, strong coffee that could strip paint. Then Luke would head back outside to work with the cattle and horses, while Clara and Samuel tackled the endless tasks of maintaining a household through a Montana winter. Clara discovered that she enjoyed the work. There was something satisfying about scrubbing floors until they gleamed, about polishing silver that had tarnished from disuse, about bringing order to rooms that had grown dusty and neglected in the chaos following James Porter's death. The physical labor exhausted her, but it was a clean exhaustion, honest and earned. At night, she slept without the nightmares that had plagued her in Boston. Samuel proved to be excellent company, full of stories about his years on the frontier. He'd been a trail cook in his younger days, driving cattle from Texas to Montana before his legs had given out, and he'd settled at Porter Ranch. He taught Clara how to make sourdough bread, how to render lard, how to stretch supplies through the long winter when trips to town were difficult. His patience was endless, his humor dry, and within days, Clara felt like she'd known him for years. Edith Harper arrived on Clara's third day at the ranch, riding up on a sturdy gray mare with a no-nonsense expression and a basket of fresh-baked goods. She was a handsome woman in her mid-50s, tall and spare, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She'd been Mary Porter's closest friend and had helped James through his grief after Mary's death. "So you're the mail-order bride," Edith said without preamble, studying Clara with frank curiosity. "Luke told me what happened. Terrible business. How are you managing?" Clara had been prepared to dislike Edith Harper. She'd imagined a busybody or a gossip, but there was something in the woman's direct manner that she appreciated. No false sympathy, no prying questions, just practical concern. "I'm managing well enough," Clara replied. "Everyone has been kind. Luke Callahan's a good man, one of the best I know, and Samuel's a treasure, though don't tell him I said so or his head will swell up like a tick." Edith handed over the basket. "I brought molasses cookies and some of my strawberry preserves. Figured you could use some variety in your meals." "Thank you, that's very thoughtful." "Not thoughtful, just practical. We're neighbors, have been for 20 years. The Harper place is about 5 miles east of here. My husband died 7 years ago, and I've been running the ranch myself ever since. It's not as big as Porter Ranch, but it's mine, and I'm proud of it." Edith followed Clara into the kitchen, making herself at home with the ease of someone who'd spent countless hours in the house. "Now, I understand Luke's offered you a position as housekeeper. Is that arrangement working out?" "Yes, very well. Everyone has been respectful and kind. I have my own room, my privacy, and meaningful work. I couldn't ask for more." Edith nodded approvingly. "Good. I told Luke I'd stop by regularly to make sure everything stays proper. Not that I doubt him. Like I said, he's honorable as they come. But people talk, and I won't have your reputation damaged. You've had enough hardship without adding scandal to it." Over the following weeks, Edith became a regular presence at the ranch, stopping by 2 or 3 times a week to help with the heavier household tasks and to provide female companionship. Clara was grateful for her no-nonsense friendship. Edith didn't coddle or pity her. Instead, she treated Clara as an equal, someone capable of handling difficulty without falling apart. It was Edith who explained the complicated situation surrounding James Porter's estate. "The problem is that James died intestate," Edith said one afternoon as she and Clara worked together in the kitchen, preparing supplies for smoking meat. "No will, no clear heirs. His parents are dead, and he was an only child. Mary's family back east might try to claim the property, but they showed no interest when she was alive, so I doubt they have much legal standing. Most likely the ranch will end up in probate court, and God knows how long that will take. Could be months, could be years." "What will happen to Luke and Samuel?" Clara asked, alarmed. "Will they lose their positions?" "Not if I have anything to say about it. I've already spoken to Judge Morrison in Silver Ridge. He's a reasonable man, and he understands that the ranch needs to keep operating. He's appointed a temporary administrator, fellow named Martin Greer from the bank, to oversee things until the estate is settled. Greer's main concern is that the ranch stays profitable, so Luke and Samuel's jobs are safe for now." "And mine?" Edith gave her a sharp look. "You worried about that?" "I'd be foolish not to worry. I'm the newest arrival, the least essential. If there are financial pressures, I'd be the obvious choice to let go." "Maybe if Greer was an idiot, but he's not. He came out here last week to look things over, and even he could see that the household was in better shape than it had been in months. You're doing good work, Clara. They'd be fools to let you go." Still, Clara couldn't entirely shake her worry. She'd learned not to count on anything, not to assume that any good situation would last. So she worked harder, made herself more useful, saved every penny of her wages against the day when she might need to leave. Luke seemed to sense her anxiety. One evening, about 3 weeks after Clara's arrival, he found her in James Porter's study, working on the household accounts by lamplight. She'd taken over the bookkeeping duties, discovering that she had a talent for organizing numbers and tracking expenses. The account books had been in disarray since James's death, and Clara found satisfaction in bringing order to the chaos. "You're going to ruin your eyes working by lamplight," Luke said from the doorway. Clara looked up, startled. She hadn't heard him approach. "I wanted to finish reconciling last month's expenses. There are some discrepancies I need to track down." "It can wait until morning." Luke moved into the study, glancing at the open ledgers spread across the desk. "You've been working yourself hard, Clara. Too hard, maybe. I want to be useful. I want to earn my keep. You're earning it 10 times over. The house hasn't looked this good since Mary was alive. Samuel says the pantry's better organized than it's been in years. And these books," he gestured at the ledgers. "You've made sense of months of confusion. You don't need to prove yourself." Clara set down her pen and met his eyes. "Yes, I do. I need to prove that I'm worth keeping when the hard decisions come. I need to prove that letting me go would be a mistake." Luke was quiet for a moment, his blue-gray eyes steady on her face. Then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, his large frame making the chair look small. "Clara, I want you to understand something. Your position here isn't conditional on how hard you work or how useful you make yourself. You have a place at this ranch as long as you want it. That's not going to change, no matter what happens with the estate." "You can't promise that. You're not the owner." "No, but I have some say in how things run. And I've already made it clear to Greer and to Judge Morrison that you're essential to the household. They trust my judgment." "Why?" The question escaped before Clara could stop it. "Why do you care so much about what happens to me?" Luke looked down at his hands, weathered and scarred from years of ranch work. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough. "I told you about my sister. What I didn't tell you was that after she died, I went through her things and found the letters she'd written to me, the ones that didn't reach me in time. She wrote about how scared she was, how alone she felt, how she didn't see any good choices ahead of her. She wrote that she wished someone would just see her, really see her, and help her without judgment or expectation." He looked up, and Clara saw something raw in his expression. "When I found you on that platform, freezing and alone and terrified, all I could think was that this was my chance to do for you what I couldn't do for Sarah, to see you, to help you, to give you time and space to figure out your own path. So that's why I care, Clara, because helping you helps me make peace with failing my sister." Clara's throat tightened with emotion. "You didn't fail her, Luke. You were serving your country. You couldn't have known—" "I know that up here." He tapped his forehead. "But knowing something and feeling it are different things. Helping you, it eases something in me. Makes me feel like maybe Sarah's death wasn't completely meaningless if it taught me to recognize when someone needs help and actually provide it." They sat in silence for a moment, the lamplight casting warm shadows around the study. Outside, the wind howled, reminding them both of the harsh world beyond the walls of the house. "Thank you for telling me that," Clara said finally, "and for everything you've done. I don't think I've properly expressed how grateful I am." "You don't need to be grateful. You're not a charity case, Clara. You're a valued member of this household. Start seeing yourself that way." After that conversation, something shifted between them. Clara stopped working quite so frantically, allowed herself to rest when she was tired, to take pleasure in small accomplishments. And Luke seemed to relax around her, spending more time in the house during the evenings rather than retreating to the barn or his small foreman's cabin. They fell into a habit of sharing coffee after supper, sitting in the kitchen while Samuel cleaned up, talking about the day's events. Luke would tell her about the cattle, about which calves were thriving and which needed extra attention, about repairs that needed to be made before spring. Clara would update him on household matters, on supplies that were running low, on letters she'd written to creditors and suppliers on behalf of the estate. Sometimes their conversations ranged further. Luke told her about his time in the war, though he kept the stories light, focusing on the camaraderie and small absurdities rather than the horror. Clara told him about Boston, about her life before poverty had claimed it, about her parents and the home she'd lost. "Do you miss it?" Luke asked one evening. "Boston?" Clara considered the question carefully. "I miss what it represented, security, belonging, a place where I fit. But the actual city?
No, not really. I was never comfortable there, even when my father was alive and we had money. There were so many rules, so many expectations. I always felt like I was one mistake away from social ruin. And how do you feel here? Free, Clara said, surprising herself with the truth of it. Scared sometimes, uncertain about the future, but free. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. Luke smiled, one of his rare, genuine smiles that transformed his stern face into something almost boyish. That's what the frontier does. Strips away all the nonsense and leaves you with just yourself. It's terrifying and liberating in equal measure. As January gave way to February, the weather turned even colder. Snow fell almost daily, piling up in drifts that reached the windows. Luke and the ranch hands worked constantly to keep paths clear, to make sure the livestock had access to food and shelter. Clara watched from the windows, marveling at their endurance, at the way they pushed through conditions that would have seemed impossible to her just weeks ago. On Valentine's Day, though nobody mentioned the holiday, a blizzard struck with savage intensity. The wind howled like a living thing, driving snow horizontal, making visibility impossible beyond a few feet. Luke came in for breakfast looking grim. "Bad one," he said, shaking snow from his coat. "Going to last all day, maybe into tomorrow. I need to check the livestock, make sure nothing's trapped or exposed." "In this weather?" Clara said, alarmed. "Surely you can't have to. We could lose animals if I don't." Luke pulled his coat back on, wrapping a scarf around his face. "I'll be back in a few hours. Samuel, keep the coffee hot." "You be careful out there," Samuel called after him. "This storm's got teeth." Luke disappeared into the white fury, and Clara returned to her work, though she found herself constantly glancing out the window, trying to catch sight of him. The storm raged on, growing worse as morning progressed into afternoon. By noon, the world outside had disappeared completely into a wall of white. Samuel prepared a hearty lunch, beef stew and fresh bread, but Luke didn't return to eat it. By 2 o'clock, Clara was pacing the kitchen, worry gnawing at her. "He's all right," Samuel said, though he looked concerned too. "Luke knows this land like the back of his hand. He's probably just taking shelter in one of the line shacks until the worst passes." "What if he's hurt? What if he's lost?" "He's not lost. That man could find his way home in pitch darkness. You'll see. He'll come walking through that door any minute now, half frozen and complaining about the weather." But the minutes stretched into hours, and still Luke didn't return. By 4 o'clock, with the light already failing, Clara couldn't stand it anymore. "I'm going to look for him," she announced. "The hell you are," Samuel said sharply. "Begging your pardon for the language, miss, but that's foolishness. You'd be lost in minutes, and then we'd have 2 people to worry about instead of 1. We can't just sit here doing nothing while he's out there in this storm." "We're not doing nothing. We're keeping the house warm and the coffee hot, so when Luke gets back, he'll have somewhere safe to come home to. That's what he needs from us right now." Clara knew Samuel was right, but the waiting was agony. She threw herself into work, preparing supper even though no one was hungry, stoking every fire in the house until the rooms were almost too warm, checking and rechecking the windows for any sign of movement outside. At 5:30, just as Clara was considering defying Samuel and venturing out anyway, the kitchen door burst open. Luke stumbled in on a wave of wind and snow, looking more like a snow creature than a man. Ice crusted his eyebrows and beard, his lips were blue, and his movements were slow and clumsy. "Sweet Jesus," Samuel breathed, jumping to his feet. "Clara, get blankets, and start heating water for a bath." They sprang into action. Samuel helped Luke out of his frozen coat and boots while Clara ran for blankets and stoked the fire higher. Luke was shaking violently, his teeth chattering so hard he couldn't speak. Samuel wrapped him in blankets and pushed him into a chair near the stove. "What happened?" Samuel demanded. "You're half frozen." "Horse threw a shoe," Luke managed through chattering teeth. "Had to walk back from the north pasture. Got turned around in the storm. Took longer than it should have." "You could have died," Clara said, her voice sharp with fear that had transformed into anger now that he was safe. "What were you thinking, staying out in this?" "Was thinking about the cattle," Luke shot back, some heat returning to his voice along with feeling to his limbs. "We've got 20 head in that north pasture. They needed checking. And they'd be fine if you'd frozen to death looking after them?" "Clara, no. You were reckless and stupid, and you scared us half to death."
Luke stared at her, surprise replacing the irritation in his expression. You were worried about me? Clara realized what she'd revealed and felt her cheeks burn. Of course I was worried. Samuel was worried too. We both were. You're important to this ranch. We need you. Something in Luke's face softened. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to worry you. I should have come back sooner, but I couldn't find the damn path in the storm. Everything looked the same, just white in every direction. The hot water was ready, and between them, Claire and Samuel got Luke upstairs to the washroom, where they'd filled the tub with steaming water. Samuel shooed Clara out while he helped Luke into the bath, but she stood in the hallway, listening to make sure Luke was all right, her heart still pounding with residual fear. When Samuel emerged, he gave her a knowing look. He's fine. Cold and tired, but fine. I'll sit with him while he warms up. You go on and finish supper. But Clara couldn't settle back into work. She paced the kitchen, unable to shake the image of Luke stumbling through the blizzard, lost and freezing. The thought of him dying out there, alone in the storm, made her chest tighten with an emotion she didn't want to examine too closely. It was nearly an hour before Luke came downstairs, dressed in dry clothes, his hair still damp from the bath. He moved stiffly, like his muscles had been battered, but his color was better, and he'd stopped shaking. Supper ready? He asked, as if the whole incident had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Sit down before you fall down, Clara ordered, pointing at the kitchen table. I'll bring you food. Luke obeyed without argument, which told Clara he was more exhausted than he wanted to admit. She served him a large bowl of stew and half a loaf of bread, then poured him coffee laced with honey. He ate mechanically, his movements slow but steady. The cattle? Samuel asked. All accounted for. They were huddled in the shelter of the rocks, right where they should be. Stupid of me to worry, but I had to check. Not stupid, Samuel said. Conscientious. There's a difference. After supper, Luke tried to go back out to check on the horses, but Clara blocked his path. You're not going anywhere, she said firmly. The horses are fine in the barn. They don't need you checking on them tonight. Clara. No arguments. You nearly killed yourself today. You're going to sit by the fire, drink hot tea, and rest. That's an order. Luke looked like he wanted to argue, but Samuel backed Clara up. She's right, Luke. You pushed yourself too hard today. Even you have limits. Outnumbered, Luke allowed himself to be herded into the parlor and deposited in the comfortable chair nearest the fire. Clara brought him tea and made him drink it, then wrapped an extra quilt around his shoulders despite his protests that he was warm enough. Stop fussing, Luke grumbled, but there was no real heat in his voice. I'll stop fussing when I'm sure you're not going to collapse, Clara retorted. She sat down on the ottoman near his chair, close enough to keep an eye on him. The fire crackled pleasantly, and outside the storm continued to rage, but inside the house it was warm and safe. Clara felt the tension that had gripped her all day finally begin to ease. I really am sorry I worried you, Luke said quietly. You should be. When you didn't come back for lunch, I imagined all sorts of terrible things. You frozen in a snowbank, attacked by a wolf, fallen and broken a leg. Wolves don't usually attack people, and I'm too ornery to break that easy. Luke's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. But I appreciate your concern. It's been a long time since anyone worried about me that way. What about your mother? Doesn't she worry? Ma died 3 years ago. Fever took her quick. I was able to get back east in time to say goodbye, at least. Luke stared into the fire. After Sarah died, Ma kinda gave up. She went through the motions of living, but her heart wasn't in it anymore. When the fever came, I think part of her was relieved. I'm sorry, Clara said softly. You've lost so much. Haven't we all? You lost your father, your home, your security. You came out here expecting a new start and got James's death instead. We all carry losses, Clara. The question is what we do with them. What do you do with yours? Luke was quiet for a long moment. I work. I try to be useful. I try to make sure the losses weren't meaningless by living in a way that honors the people I've lost. Sarah wanted me to be happy. She said so in her letters. Ma wanted me to find peace. I'm not sure I've managed either, but I'm trying. Clara thought about her own losses, her own griefs. Her mother's death when Clara was 15, her father's death, and the catastrophic aftermath. The life she'd lost, the future that had evaporated. And yes, even James Porter, a man she'd never met but had pinned her hopes on. "Maybe that's all any of us can do," she said. "Try. Keep moving forward. Look for meaning in the chaos." "That's more philosophical than I expected from someone who makes such perfect biscuits." Clara laughed, surprised by the joke. "I contain multitudes, Mr. Callahan." "Luke," he corrected, as he always did. "And yes, I'm beginning to realize that you do." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire, listening to the storm. After a while, Clara noticed that Luke's breathing had deepened, his chin dropping toward his chest. He was falling asleep in the chair, exhausted from his ordeal. She should wake him, send him to bed properly, but he looked so peaceful, and she found herself unwilling to disturb him. Instead, she fetched another quilt from the hall closet and draped it carefully over him. He stirred slightly but didn't wake. Clara stood looking down at him for a moment, this rough, kind man who'd saved her life and asked nothing in return, who worked himself to exhaustion caring for animals and land and people. In sleep, the stern lines of his face softened, making him look younger, less burdened. Something warm and unfamiliar stirred in Clara's chest. She recognized it with alarm and immediately tried to suppress it. She couldn't afford feelings like that. Luke had made it clear that his help came from a desire to atone for his sister's death, not from any personal interest in Clara herself. He'd saved her out of guilt and honor, nothing more. Besides, Clara had come west looking for security, not romance. She'd wanted a marriage of convenience, not a love match. Getting emotionally entangled with Luke Callahan would be foolish on every level. She forced herself to turn away, to go back to the kitchen where Samuel was finishing the evening's baking. But as she worked alongside the old cook, rolling out dough for tomorrow's bread, Clara couldn't quite shake the memory of Luke's face in the firelight, or the fear that had gripped her when she'd thought he might be lost in the storm. The weather broke 2 days later, revealing a world transformed by snow. Drifts reached the roof lines in places, and the livestock were snowed in enough that Luke and Samuel had to dig paths to the barn and the henhouse. Clara watched from the windows, marveling at the amount of work required simply to maintain existence in this harsh place. With the storm past, Edith Harper arrived on the third day, riding up on her gray mare and looking worried. "I came as soon as I could get through," she said, stamping snow from her boots in the entryway. "Heard from the Johnsons that Luke got caught out in the storm. Is he all right?" "He's fine," Clara assured her. "Frozen and exhausted, but fine. We got him warmed up before any real damage was done. Thank God. That man takes too many risks sometimes." Edith followed Clara to the kitchen, where they found Samuel preparing bread dough. "Samuel, you old fool, how are you?" "Still breathing, which is more than some can say," Samuel replied with a grin. "Good to see you, Edith." Over coffee and fresh cinnamon rolls, Edith brought news from town. The storm had hit Silver Ridge hard, collapsing the roof of the livery stable and snowing in several families on outlying farms. A rescue party had gone out and brought everyone to safety, but it had been a close thing. "Martin Greer wants to meet with Luke and Clara," Edith said, getting to the main point of her visit. "He's coming out to the ranch tomorrow to discuss the estate situation. Thought you should know." Clara's stomach clenched with anxiety. "Do you know what he wants to discuss?" "Probably just reviewing how things are running, making sure the ranch is stable. Don't worry too much, Greer's a reasonable man. He'll see that you're all doing good work here." But Clara worried anyway. That night she lay awake in her room, listening to the wind and wondering what the next day would bring. Would Greer decide that her position was unnecessary? Would he cut costs by letting her go? She'd saved almost $60 from her wages, enough for a train ticket back east with a little left over. But the thought of leaving the ranch, of leaving Luke and Samuel, and even this harsh Montana landscape filled her with unexpected sadness. When had this place started to feel like home? Morning came too quickly. Clara dressed with extra care, choosing the most professional-looking of her wool dresses and pinning her hair up in a severe style that she hoped made her look capable and indispensable. She was in the kitchen helping Samuel with breakfast when Luke came in, also dressed more formally than usual in clean trousers and a pressed shirt. "Nervous?" he asked Clara. "Terrified," she admitted. "Don't be. Greer's coming to see how well we're managing, and we're managing better than we have in months. You've got nothing to worry about." But Clara couldn't shake her anxiety. When Martin Greer arrived at 10 o'clock, She felt her heart hammering as she opened the door to admit him. Greer was a neat, precise man in his 40s, dressed in a suit that looked out of place on a ranch. He had wire-rimmed spectacles and thinning hair, and the air of someone who lived by numbers and regulations. Clara showed him into the parlor, offered him coffee, and tried not to let her hands shake as she poured. Luke joined them, sitting beside Clara on the settee, while Greer took the chair opposite. For a few minutes, they made small talk about the weather and the condition of the roads. Then Greer pulled out a leather folder and got down to business. "I've been reviewing the ranch's financial records," he said, opening the folder and producing several sheets of paper covered in neat columns of figures. "I must say, the bookkeeping has improved dramatically in the past month. Miss Dawson, I understand you're responsible for that?" "Yes, sir. The accounts were somewhat disorganized after Mr. Porter's death. I've been working to reconcile them and bring everything current. You've done excellent work. These records are as clear and accurate as any I've seen." Greer made a note on his paper. "Mr. Callahan, I'd like to discuss the livestock situation. How are the cattle faring through the winter?" Luke gave a detailed report on herd numbers, calf survival rates, feed supplies, and spring projections. Clara was impressed by his command of details, by the way he could rattle off numbers and statistics without hesitation. Greer asked pointed questions, and Luke answered them all with confidence. After nearly an hour of discussion, Greer sat back and removed his spectacles, polishing them with a handkerchief. "I'll be frank with you both," he said. "When Judge Morrison appointed me as temporary administrator, I was concerned about this ranch's viability. James Porter's death created significant uncertainty, and I worried that the operation might collapse without proper management. But I'm pleased to say that my concerns were unfounded. You've maintained stability and even improved efficiency in several areas. The ranch is in good shape." Clara felt some of her tension ease. "So our positions are secure?" "For the foreseeable future, yes. The judge and I agree that the current arrangement is working well. Mr. Callahan will continue as foreman, Samuel will continue as cook, and Miss Dawson, you'll continue as housekeeper. You'll all receive your regular wages, and we'll review the situation again in 3 months." "What about the long-term future of the ranch?" Luke asked. "Any progress on the probate situation?" Greer sighed. "That's where things get complicated. We've located Mary Porter's family back in Philadelphia. She had a cousin who's expressed interest in the property. He's filed a claim with the probate court. However, given them the cousin had no contact with Mary or James for over a decade, his claim is weak. The judge will likely rule that the property should be sold and the proceeds distributed to the state, unless another heir comes forward or someone makes an offer to purchase." "How long will that take?" Clara asked. "Probate cases can drag on for years, but I'd estimate we'll have a resolution within 6 to 8 months. Until then, we maintain the status quo." After Greer left, Clara and Luke sat in the parlor processing the news. 6 months, Clara said. "That's longer than I expected. Does that worry you?" Clara considered the question honestly. "A month ago, I would have said yes. I would have been desperate to know exactly when I could leave, where I'd go next. But now—" She trailed off, not sure how to express the complicated feelings swirling inside her. "Now?" Luke prompted gently. "Now I'm not in such a hurry to leave. This place, these people, you, Samuel, even Edith, you've all become important to me. I'm not ready to give that up yet." Luke was quiet for a moment, his blue-gray eyes studying her face. "You know you're important to us too, right? You're not just the housekeeper, Clara. You're part of this family we've built here." The word family hit Clara with unexpected force. She hadn't had a family since her father died. She'd been alone for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to belong to something larger than herself. "Family," she repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." "Good, because that's what we are now, whether we planned it or not." Luke stood, offering his hand to help Clara to her feet. "Come on, let's go tell Samuel the good news. He's probably worn a hole in the kitchen floor pacing." As they walked together toward the kitchen, Clara felt something settle inside her, a sense of rightness, of being exactly where she was supposed to be. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know where she'd be in 6 months or a year, but for now, in this moment, she was home, and that was enough. Retry PQ, Part 4, Louis. Viết nhanh, nất 100 phần hundred từ liên kết liên mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện và hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liên mạch khi ghép lại. Mọi phần liền mạch với phần trước, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document Part 4. The winter began to loosen its grip on Montana as February gave way to March. The days grew incrementally longer, the sun climbing higher in the sky, though the nights remained brutally cold. Snow still covered the ground in deep drifts, but there were moments now when Clara could stand on the porch and feel genuine warmth on her face, could hear water dripping from icicles as they began their slow surrender to spring. With the worst of winter behind them, the work at the ranch shifted. Luke and the hands began preparing for calving season, checking fences that had been buried under snow, repairing equipment that would be needed when the real work began. Clara found herself working alongside Samuel to take inventory of supplies, to plan for the busy months ahead when they'd need to feed extra hands hired for spring roundup. It was during one of these inventory sessions that Clara discovered the cellar. She'd been looking for the preserves that Samuel insisted were stored somewhere in the house, following his vague directions down a narrow staircase she'd never noticed before, hidden behind a door in the kitchen pantry. The cellar was larger than she'd expected, cool and dark, lined with shelves holding jars of vegetables and fruits put up the previous summer. But at the back of the cellar, behind stacks of empty crates, Clara found something else, a trunk, old and battered, covered in dust. Curiosity got the better of her. Clara dragged the trunk out into the light filtering down from the kitchen and opened it carefully. Inside, wrapped in muslin, were clothes. Women's clothes, beautiful and expensive. Silk dresses in jewel tones, lace shawls, embroidered gloves. Beneath the clothes were books, their leather bindings cracked with age, and at the very bottom, a wooden box containing letters tied with ribbon. Clara knew she shouldn't look, that these were clearly Mary Porter's personal belongings, but she couldn't help herself. She lifted out one of the dresses, a deep blue silk with tiny pearl buttons, and held it up. It was exquisite, the kind of dress Clara's mother might have worn to the opera in better days. Those were Mary's. Clara spun around, startled. Edith Harper stood at the bottom of the cellar stairs, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "I'm sorry," Clara said quickly, folding the dress carefully. "I was looking for preserves, and I found this trunk. I shouldn't have opened it." "Don't apologize. You'd have found it eventually." Edith moved closer, looking down at the trunk with a mixture of sadness and affection. "James couldn't bear to look at Mary's things after she died, so he packed them away down here, said he'd go through them someday, but he never did. I suppose he couldn't face it. They're beautiful. She had wonderful taste. Mary came from money. Philadelphia society. Her family was horrified when she married James and moved out to Montana Territory. They cut her off completely, said she was throwing her life away." Edith reached into the trunk and pulled out one of the letters. But Mary never regretted it. She loved James, loved this ranch, loved the freedom of the frontier. These letters, they're the ones she wrote to her sister back east. The sister never answered, but Mary kept writing anyway, telling her about her life here. Clara felt a pang of sympathy for Mary Porter, a woman she'd never met but felt she understood. She must have been lonely sometimes. We all are out here, but she had James, and she had friends, and she had hope. That's more than many people get. Edith carefully returned the letter to the trunk. "You know, you're about Mary's size. These dresses would probably fit you." "Oh, I couldn't." "Why not? They're just sitting down here gathering dust." Mary would have hated that. She believed beautiful things should be used and enjoyed, not locked away. Edith pulled out the blue silk dress again, holding it up against Clara. "Yes, this would look lovely on you. The color matches your eyes." "Edith, it wouldn't be appropriate. These belong to James's wife." "James is dead, and Mary's been gone 5 years. These clothes aren't doing anyone any good moldering in a cellar." Edith's voice was firm but kind. "Besides, Mary would have liked you. You're practical and brave, and you don't suffer fools. Those were her favorite qualities in people. She'd want you to have these things." Clara ran her fingers over the silk, feeling its softness, imagining what it would be like to wear something so fine again. She hadn't owned anything this beautiful since before her father died. "Take the trunk upstairs," Edith said. "Go through it properly. Keep what you want, and we'll find homes for the rest." Those books especially, Mary loved to read. I think she'd be pleased knowing her books were being enjoyed again. So Clara brought the trunk upstairs to her room and spent that evening going through its contents carefully. The dresses were indeed her size, though they'd need some minor alterations. Mary had been slightly taller. There were 5 dresses in all, along with several shawls, gloves, stockings, and even a beautiful cloak lined with fur. The books were a treasure trove: novels by Dickens and Austen, poetry by Wordsworth and Keats, even some political treatises that suggested Mary Porter had been a woman of serious intellect. The letters Clara set aside, intending to ask Edith what should be done with them. They felt too personal, too intimate to read, even though Mary was long dead. That night at supper, Clara mentioned the trunk to Luke and Samuel, wanting to make sure they had no objections to her keeping Mary's things. "Lord, no," Samuel said immediately. Mary would have been tickled pink to know someone was getting use out of those dresses. She was always practical that way, despite coming from fancy people. Luke nodded agreement. "Samuel's right. Mary didn't believe in waste. If those things fit you and you like them, you should keep them. She'd approve." "But won't it be strange seeing me in Mary's clothes?" Luke considered this, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. "Maybe at first. But Mary's been gone a long time, and the house is full of her things anyway. Her furniture, her china, her piano. We've gotten used to living with her memory. This won't be much different." Still, Clara felt nervous the first time she wore one of Mary's dresses, a deep burgundy wool with black trim that was both elegant and practical. She came down to breakfast feeling self-conscious, waiting for someone to comment or react. Samuel glanced up from the stove and smiled. "That color suits you, miss. You look real fine." Luke's reaction was more complicated. He stared at Clara for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across his face. Then he cleared his throat and said, "Edith was right. The clothes should be worn. You look nice, Clara." The compliment, simple as it was, made Clara's cheeks warm. She wasn't used to Luke commenting on her appearance. Their relationship had remained carefully proper, friendly but with clear boundaries. They were employer and employee, friends perhaps, but nothing more. Yet lately, Clara had become increasingly aware of Luke in ways that troubled her. The way his hands looked when he held his coffee cup, large and capable and scarred from work. The sound of his voice in the evening, low and rough, as they sat by the fire talking. The rare smile that transformed his stern face into something warmer, more approachable. She told herself sternly that these feelings were natural, but irrelevant. Luke had made his position clear. He'd helped her out of a sense of obligation to his dead sister, nothing more. He'd never given any indication that he saw her as anything other than a responsibility, someone who needed protection and assistance. But sometimes Clara caught him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. And sometimes, when they sat together in the evening, the silence between them felt charged with something unspoken. It was confusing and dangerous, and Clara tried hard to ignore it. The first real sign of spring came in mid-March, when the ice on the creek began to break up. Clara heard the sound from her bedroom window one morning, a deep cracking followed by rushing water. She threw on her dressing gown and hurried downstairs to find Luke and Samuel already on the porch, watching the creek transform from a frozen ribbon into a living, moving thing. "Spring's coming," Samuel said with satisfaction. "Another few weeks and we'll have green grass and calves dropping all over the place." "And mud," Luke added. "Don't forget the mud. Spring in Montana means mud deep enough to lose a horse in." But despite his grumbling, Luke looked pleased. The worst of winter was truly over, and with it, the constant worry about livestock freezing or supplies running short. They'd made it through, all of them intact and relatively healthy. That afternoon, Edith arrived with news that set Clara's carefully ordered world spinning. "There's a lawyer coming from Philadelphia," Edith announced without preamble, accepting the coffee Clara offered her. "Mary's cousin, the one who filed the claim on the estate, he's hired a fancy attorney to press his case. They'll be here next week to inspect the property and interview everyone involved." Clara felt her stomach drop. "What does that mean for us?"
Means the cousin's serious about claiming the ranch.
If he can prove he's Mary's closest living relative, he might actually win the probate case. Edith's expression was grim. And if he wins, he could sell the place out from under you or bring in his own people to run it. Either way, your positions would be in jeopardy. All of us? Luke asked. He'd come in from outside, drawn by the sound of voices. They'd replace the whole operation? Possibly. This cousin, fellow named Thornton Harper III, no relation to me despite the name, he's apparently a banker who knows nothing about ranching. He might keep you on, Luke, since you know the land, but he could just as easily sell to another rancher and let them handle staffing. Clara's mind raced through the implications. She'd saved about $80 now, enough to travel back east with a little cushion, but she'd grown so comfortable here that she'd stopped thinking seriously about leaving. The idea of being forced out, of losing this place that had become home, filled her with unexpected panic. "When exactly is this lawyer coming?" Luke asked, his voice tight. "Next Wednesday. Martin Greer sent word this morning. He wants everyone to be available for interviews. You, Samuel, Clara, me, anyone who has knowledge of James's intentions or Mary's family situation." After Edith left, Luke found Clara in the study, staring blindly at the account books she was supposed to be reconciling. "You all right?" he asked. "I don't know. I suppose I knew this was temporary, that the situation would change eventually, but I'd started to think—" She trailed off, not sure how to express the complicated tangle of emotions. "You'd started to think maybe you could stay," Luke finished for her. "Yes. Foolish of me." "Not foolish. Natural." Luke pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, his blue-gray eyes serious. "Clara, I want you to know something. Whatever happens with this probate case, whatever this Philadelphia lawyer decides, I'm not going to let you be thrown out without options. If we all lose our positions here, I'll find work at another ranch and I'll make sure you have a position too. You won't be left stranded again. You can't promise that. You don't know what opportunities will be available. I know that ranches always need good workers, and I know enough people in Montana that I can find something. Trust me on this." Clara wanted to trust him, wanted to believe that everything would work out, but she'd learned the hard way that promises were fragile things, easily broken by circumstances beyond anyone's control. What if the cousin keeps you on, but not me? What if he decides he doesn't need a housekeeper or wants to bring in his own people? Then I'll quit and we'll both find something else. "Luke, you can't quit. You've been here 8 years. This ranch is your life." "My life is what I make it," Luke said firmly. "I'm not staying anywhere that doesn't have room for you." The statement hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither of them seemed ready to examine. Clara felt her heart beating faster, felt heat rising to her face. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why does it matter so much to you whether I have a place?" Luke was quiet for a long moment, his gaze dropping to his hands. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being a responsibility and became a friend, became someone I care about, and I don't abandon people I care about." "Just a friend?" The question escaped before Clara could stop it, bold and dangerous. Luke's head snapped up, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made Clara's breath catch. For a moment she thought he might say something, might acknowledge the tension that had been building between them for weeks. But then he stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I should get back to work," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Let me know if you need anything." He left before Clara could respond, and she sat alone in the study, her heart pounding, wondering if she'd just made a terrible mistake by pushing too hard too fast. The days leading up to the lawyer's visit were tense. Everyone at the ranch felt it, the uncertainty, the worry about what the future might hold. Samuel grew quieter than usual, spending long hours in the kitchen baking elaborate meals as if trying to prove the value of his presence. Luke threw himself into work with even more intensity than normal, riding out before dawn and returning after dark, exhausted and uncommunicative. Clara tried to prepare for the interview, rehearsing answers to questions she imagined the lawyer might ask. How long had she been at the ranch? What were her duties? Had James Porter ever mentioned his wife's family? Did she have any knowledge of his intentions for the property? On Tuesday evening, the night before the lawyer was due to arrive, Clara found herself unable to sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind and the creaking of the old house. Finally, around midnight, she gave up on sleep and went downstairs, thinking to make herself some warm milk. She found Luke in the kitchen, sitting at the table in the darkness, a glass of whiskey in front of him. "Couldn't sleep either?" Clara asked, lighting a lamp. "Too much on my mind." Luke gestured at the chair across from him. "Join me?" Clara sat, pulling her dressing gown tighter around herself. She was acutely aware that she was alone with Luke in the middle of the night, improperly dressed, in a situation that would scandalize anyone who found out. But she couldn't bring herself to care about propriety just then. "Are you worried about tomorrow?" she asked. "Some. Mostly I'm angry. Angry that some stranger from Philadelphia who never gave a damn about James or Mary gets to swoop in and maybe take everything away. Angry that there's nothing I can do to stop it." Luke took a drink of whiskey. "I hate feeling powerless." "I know the feeling. I've felt powerless for months, ever since my father died and left me with nothing. Coming here was supposed to change that. I was supposed to take control of my life, make my own choices. Instead, I'm still at the mercy of circumstances beyond my control." "Maybe we're thinking about this wrong," Luke said slowly. "Maybe instead of waiting to see what this lawyer decides, we should make our own plans. Take control before someone takes it from us." "What do you mean?" Luke leaned forward, his eyes bright with something that might have been inspiration or desperation. "What if we bought the ranch ourselves, made an offer to the probate court before the cousin can finalize his claim?" Clara stared at him. "With what money? Neither of us has the kind of capital it would take to purchase a property this size." "No, but we could get investors, or a loan from the bank, or—" Luke ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. But there has to be a way. James built something good here, something worth fighting for. I don't want to see it fall into the hands of someone who'll ruin it or sell it off piece by piece. Even if we could get the money, why would the court sell to us instead of the cousin? He has a legal claim. His claim's weak, and the court's main interest is settling the estate quickly and efficiently. If we could put together a serious offer, they might accept it just to avoid more legal complications." Luke's expression was intense, almost fevered. "Think about it, Clara. We could run this place together, you managing the household and books, me handling the livestock and land. We'd be partners, equal owners. You'd have real security, real control over your future." The vision he painted was intoxicating. Clara could see it, herself not as an employee but as an owner, making real decisions, building something that belonged to her. It was everything she'd dreamed of when she'd first answered James Porter's advertisement, but better, because it would be earned rather than given. "It's a beautiful idea," she said softly, "but I don't see how we could make it work. We'd need thousands of dollars, and I have less than 100 saved." "I have about 500 put aside," Luke said. "It's not enough, not nearly enough. But maybe it's a start. Maybe if we talk to the bank, explain the situation—" "Banks don't give loans to women," Clara pointed out, "and they'd want collateral we don't have." Luke's excitement deflated slightly. "You're right. It was a stupid idea." "Not stupid, just difficult." Clara reached across the table and put her hand over his, an impulsive gesture of comfort. "But I appreciate you thinking of it. I appreciate you wanting to fight for this place, for us." Luke turned his hand over, his calloused palm warm against hers. They sat like that for a moment, hands clasped on the kitchen table, and Clara felt the air between them change, grow charged with possibility. "Clara," Luke said, his voice low and rough, "I need to tell you something." "What?" But before he could answer, they heard footsteps on the stairs. They broke apart quickly, Luke pulling his hand back as if burned. Samuel appeared in the kitchen doorway, squinting in the lamplight. "Thought I heard voices," he said. "Everything all right?" "Fine," Luke said, standing abruptly. "Just couldn't sleep. I was heading back out anyway, wanted to check on the horses one more time." He left without looking at Clara again, and she sat at the table with Samuel, her hand still tingling from Luke's touch, wondering what he'd been about to say. Morning came too quickly. The Philadelphia lawyer, a Mr. Reginald Whitmore, arrived at 10 o'clock in a hired carriage, accompanied by Martin Greer. Whitmore was exactly what Clara had expected. Middle-aged, immaculately dressed, with the polished manner of someone who was very good at his job and knew it. Greer made the introductions in the parlor. "Mr. Whitmore, this is Luke Callahan, the ranch foreman, and this is Miss Clara Dawson, the housekeeper." Whitmore's eyes flickered over Clara with undisguised curiosity. "Miss Dawson, I understand you were engaged to marry the late James Porter." "I was coming west to marry him, yes, but he died before we could meet." "And yet you stayed on as an employee. Interesting." Whitmore pulled out a leather notebook. "If you don't mind, I'd like to interview each of you separately. I have questions about Mr. Porter's intentions, his relationship with his late wife's family, and the general management of the property." He interviewed Luke first, closeting himself with the foreman in the study for nearly an hour. Then Samuel was called in. Finally, it was Clara's turn. Whitmore sat behind James Porter's desk, a presumption that irritated Clara immediately, and gestured for her to sit in the chair opposite. He opened his notebook and studied her with sharp, assessing eyes. "Miss Dawson, let's start with the basics. How did you come to answer Mr. Porter's matrimonial advertisement?" Clara explained briefly about her father's death, the debts, her desperate circumstances. She kept her voice steady and factual, refusing to let Whitmore see how much the recounting cost her. "And when you arrived to find Mr. Porter deceased, why didn't you return east immediately?" "I had no money for passage. Mr. Callahan offered me a position as housekeeper, which gave me time to save wages for a ticket." "Yet you're still here months later. Have you saved enough now?" "Yes." "But you're choosing to stay. Why?" Clara met Whitmore's gaze steadily. "Because I've found work I enjoy and people I care about. Because this has become my home." "Your home," Whitmore repeated, making a note. "Tell me, Miss Dawson, in your time here, did Mr. Porter keep any papers regarding his late wife's family? Letters, perhaps, or documents mentioning relatives?" "If he did, I never saw them. The personal papers were kept in the study, which I didn't have access to until after his death. Mr. Callahan found my letters from Mr. Porter in the study after he died." "And you've been managing the household accounts?" "Yes." "The books were in some disarray after Mr. Porter's death. I've been working to organize them." "Convenient," Whitmore murmured. "Very convenient for someone to have intimate knowledge of the estate's finances." Clara felt anger flare. "If you're implying something improper, Mr. Whitmore, I suggest you say so directly." "I'm not implying anything. I'm simply noting facts." Whitmore closed his notebook. "One final question, Miss Dawson. If my client, Mr. Thornton Harper, were to assume ownership of this property, would you expect to retain your position?" "I would hope to, but I understand that's his decision to make." "Indeed it is. Thank you for your time." The interview left Clara feeling dirty and defensive, as if she'd been accused of some crime she couldn't name. She found Luke waiting in the kitchen, his expression dark. "That man's a snake," Luke said without preamble. "Spent half the interview trying to trip me up, get me to contradict myself, or admit to something that would help his client's case." "He practically accused me of impropriety," Clara said. "Suggested there was something suspicious about my managing the books. He's trying to build a case that we're all incompetent or corrupt to make his client look like the better option for running the place." Luke's jaw was tight with anger. "Bastard!" Samuel emerged from his own interview looking shaken. "That lawyer asked me if Mr. James ever spoke ill of his wife's family, if he ever said anything that suggested he wouldn't want them inheriting. I told him the truth, that Mr. James barely mentioned them at all. But I could tell that wasn't the answer he wanted." After Whitmore left, the three of them sat in the kitchen, processing what had happened. Edith arrived mid-afternoon, having had her own interview at Whitmore's hotel in town. "That man is a professional assassin with a law degree," she announced. "He tried to get me to say that James was mentally incompetent in his final days, that he wasn't thinking clearly when he posted his matrimonial advertisement. I told him James was sharp as a tack right up until the pneumonia hit, but I don't know if he believed me." "What happens now?" Clara asked. "Now Whitmore goes back to Philadelphia and reports to his client. Thornton Harper will decide whether to proceed with his claim or make an offer to purchase the property. Either way, the judge will make a ruling within the next few months." Edith's expression was sympathetic. I'm sorry, all of you. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. That night, Clara couldn't face the thought of supper. She told Samuel she had a headache and retreated to her room, where she sat by the window and watched the sun set over the Montana prairie. The land was beginning to show hints of green now, the snow melting in patches, revealing the brown grass beneath. Soon it would be spring in earnest, and with spring would come the judge's ruling, and with the ruling would come change. Clara had come west believing she was moving toward security and stability. Instead, she'd found only more uncertainty, more upheaval. She was tired of it, tired of always being at the mercy of other people's decisions. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Clara, it's Luke. Can I come in? Clara hesitated, then opened the door. Luke stood in the hallway, his hat in his hands, looking uncertain in a way she'd never seen before. I wanted to check on you, he said. Samuel said you weren't feeling well. Just tired and discouraged. Yeah, I know the feeling. Luke shifted his weight. Listen, about what I started to say last night, before Samuel interrupted. You don't have to explain. I understand the situation is complicated. You don't understand, though. That's the problem. Luke took a deep breath as if gathering courage. What I was trying to say was that my reasons for helping you, for wanting you to stay, they're not what I told you they were, or not just what I told you. Clara's heart began to beat faster. What do you mean? I mean that yes, at first I helped you because of Sarah, because I wanted to make amends. But somewhere along the way that changed. You changed things. Luke looked directly at her, his blue-gray eyes intense. I care about you, Clara. Not as a responsibility or an obligation. I care about you as a woman I've come to admire and respect, and... He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. And what? Clara whispered. And have feelings for that go beyond friendship, Luke finished in a rush. I know the timing's terrible. I know you came here looking for security, not romance. I know I'm probably the last person you'd want to be burdened with feelings for, but I couldn't let this lawyer come in and potentially ruin everything without at least being honest with you about how I feel. Clara stood frozen, her mind racing. Luke Callahan had feelings for her. This stern, taciturn man who'd saved her life had just admitted he cared about her as more than a friend. It was the last thing she'd expected, and yet somehow it felt inevitable. Say something, Luke said, looking miserable. Even if it's just to tell me I'm a fool. You're not a fool, Clara managed. You're brave. Braver than I've been. Because I've had feelings for you too, Luke, and I've been too scared to admit them, even to myself. Luke's expression transformed from misery to hope so quickly it was almost comical. You have feelings for me? Yes. I've been fighting them because I thought you only saw me as a responsibility, as someone you were obligated to protect. But if that's not true, if you actually care about me, Clara took a step closer to him. Then yes, I have feelings for you, strong ones. Clara. Her name was somewhere between a prayer and a curse on his lips. If I kiss you right now, am I taking advantage? Because you work for me, and there's a power imbalance, and I don't want you to feel pressured. Luke, Clara interrupted, reaching up to cup his weathered face in her hands. Stop talking and kiss me. So he did. Luke's lips were warm and slightly chapped, and he kissed her with a gentleness that surprised her given his rough exterior. His hands came up to cradle her face, his touch reverent, as if she were something precious and breakable. Clara pressed closer, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair, and the kiss deepened, became something urgent and desperate, and full of all the emotion they'd been suppressing for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Luke rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that for so long, he admitted. Why didn't you? Because I was trying to be honorable. Trying not to take advantage of someone in a vulnerable position. Luke pulled back slightly to look at her. But Clara, I need you to understand, if we do this, if we admit these feelings, everything changes. And with this probate situation hanging over us, with so much uncertainty about the future, I don't want you to feel trapped. I don't feel trapped. I feel the opposite. Like for the first time in months, I'm making a choice based on what I want, not what circumstances force on me. Clara smiled. Besides, we've faced uncertainty together before. We can do it again. So what are we saying here? That we're... Luke seemed unsure how to label what was happening between them. Courting? Clara suggested. If that's not too old-fashioned a term. Courting works for me. Luke kissed her again, more briefly this time. Though it's going to be hard to maintain proper distance when what I really want to do is kiss you every time I see you. Clara laughed, feeling lighter than she had in days. We'll manage. We've managed everything else. They stood together in the doorway of Clara's room for a few more minutes, reluctant to part, stealing kisses, and making quiet plans for how to navigate this new development in their relationship. Eventually, Luke forced himself to leave, though not before extracting a promise from Clara that she'd join him for a ride the next day, weather permitting. Clara closed her door and leaned against it, her heart still racing, her lips still tingling from Luke's kisses. Everything was uncertain, their jobs, their home, their future. But for the first time since leaving Boston, Clara felt truly hopeful. Because whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. She had Luke. And somehow, that made all the difference. The next morning dawned clear and relatively warm, with genuine spring sunshine that made the remaining snow sparkle like diamonds. Luke appeared at the house after breakfast, as promised, leading 2 saddled horses. "Ready for that ride?" he asked Clara, his eyes warm with affection and something more. "Ready," Clara confirmed. They rode out across the prairie, staying within sight of the ranch buildings but venturing far enough to feel private, away from Samuel's knowing eyes. The land was beautiful in the morning light, all golden grass and blue sky and mountains in the distance. Clara was getting better at riding now, more confident in the saddle, able to enjoy the sensation of movement and freedom. Luke led them to a spot near the creek, where the water ran clear and fast over smooth stones. He helped Clara dismount, his hands lingering at her waist, and they stood together looking out over the landscape. "I love this land," Luke said quietly. "I know it's harsh and unforgiving, but there's something about it that gets into your blood. The space, the freedom, the feeling that you can be whoever you want to be out here without all the rules and expectations of civilization hemming you in." "I'm starting to understand that," Clara said. "When I first arrived, I thought Montana was brutal and hostile. But now I see the beauty in it, the strength it takes to survive here, the courage it takes to build a life in such a challenging place." Luke turned to face her, his expression serious. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "All right. If the worst happens, if we lose our positions at the ranch, if we have to start over somewhere else, would you still want to be with me? Because I don't have much to offer beyond hard work and honest intentions. I don't have money or property or security. I'm just a ranch foreman who might be out of a job in a few weeks." Clara looked up at this man who'd saved her life, who'd given her shelter and friendship and now was offering her his heart. She thought about what she'd wanted when she'd first answered James Porter's advertisement. Security, stability, a clearly defined role. She'd wanted safety above all else. But somewhere along the way, her wants had changed. She'd discovered that safety without love was just another kind of prison. That stability without passion was just existence, not life. "Luke Callahan," she said firmly, "I would be with you if you were penniless and we had to live in a tent on the prairie. I didn't fall in love with your position or your prospects. I fell in love with you, your strength, your kindness, your honor. Everything else is just details." Luke's face broke into a smile so bright it transformed him completely. "You love me?" "Yes, you idiot. I love you." "Good. Because I love you too." He pulled her close and kissed her thoroughly, right there in the Montana sunshine, and Clara felt something inside her finally settle into place. Whatever the future brought, whatever challenges they had to face, they would face them together. And that was more than Clara Dawson had ever dared to hope for. Retry PQ Part 5 lưu ý. Viết 9.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện. Pha hối thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ. Phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc.
Kẻ theo ngôi thứ ba, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man kết thúc trọn vẹn câu chuyện. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document part 5. The weeks following their confession by the creek were among the happiest Clara had ever known, despite the uncertainty hanging over their future.
She and Luke were careful to maintain propriety around others, but they stole moments together whenever they could. Early morning rides before breakfast, evening walks along the creek, quiet conversations in the parlor after Samuel had retired for the night. Edith noticed the change in them almost immediately. She arrived one afternoon in early April to find Clara humming while she worked in the kitchen, a smile playing at her lips as she kneaded bread dough. "Well," Edith said, settling herself at the kitchen table with a knowing look. "Something's different. You're positively glowing, girl." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't play coy with me. I've known Luke Callahan for 8 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. And you're practically floating around this house. So out with it. What's happened between you two?" Clara hesitated, then decided there was no point in pretending. Edith would find out eventually anyway, and she'd rather have the older woman as an ally than be caught in a deception. "Luke and I have an understanding. We're courting." Edith's stern expression melted into a smile. "Well, thank the Lord. I was beginning to think you two would dance around each other forever. Does Samuel know?" "I think he suspects. We haven't told him directly, but he's not blind." "Good. That's good." Edith reached across the table and squeezed Clara's hand. "I'm happy for you both, truly. Luke's been alone too long, carrying too much weight by himself. And you deserve someone who sees your worth, who'll stand by you through hard times." "Thank you, Edith. That means more than you know." "Just one word of caution," Edith said, her expression growing serious. "Be careful about letting news of your courtship spread beyond this ranch right now. With the probate case still pending, you don't want to give that Philadelphia lawyer any ammunition. He might try to suggest there's something improper happening here, use it to undermine your credibility." Clara hadn't thought of that, and the reminder sent a chill through her. "You're right. We'll be discreet." Spring arrived in earnest as April progressed. The snow melted completely, revealing brown grass that quickly began to green. Wildflowers appeared almost overnight: purple lupine, yellow balsam root, tiny white blossoms Clara couldn't name. The creek swelled with snowmelt, running high and fast, and the cattle began to calve, which meant long days and short nights for Luke and the ranch hands. Clara watched from the house as Luke worked, admiring his competence and strength. He moved among the cattle with calm authority, checking on laboring cows, assisting with difficult births, doctoring sick calves. He came to meals exhausted and covered in dirt and worse, but there was satisfaction in his face. This was work he understood, work that mattered. One evening in mid-April, Luke came to the house later than usual, looking haggard. Clara met him at the door with concern. "What's wrong?" "Lost a cow and her calf tonight. She was young, first pregnancy, and the calf was breech. By the time we realized what was happening, it was too late for both of them." Luke's voice was rough with exhaustion and grief. "I hate losing them. Always feels like a failure, even when there's nothing more you could have done." Clara led him to the kitchen, sat him down, and poured him coffee. She knew better than to offer empty platitudes. Instead, she simply stayed close, her presence a quiet comfort. "Tell me something good," Luke said after a while. "Something that has nothing to do with death or probate courts or uncertainty, just something good." Clara thought for a moment, then smiled. "I finished Mary Porter's copy of Pride and Prejudice last night. It made me laugh out loud in several places, which I wasn't expecting. And there's this beautiful passage near the end where Elizabeth realizes she's in love with Darcy, where she thinks about how grateful she is to have learned to appreciate him properly. It reminded me of us." "How so?" "Because I didn't see you clearly at first. When you found me on that platform, I saw you as my rescuer, someone I was obligated to. Then you became my employer, my friend. But it took time for me to really see you, to understand your heart, your character, the depth of your kindness. Like Elizabeth with Darcy, I had to learn to appreciate you properly." Luke reached across the table and took her hand. "And now? Now I see you clearly, and what I see makes me love you more every day."
Luke pulled her close, kissing her with a tenderness that made Clara's heart ache. These stolen moments were precious, made more so by their uncertain future.
Clara tried not to think about what would happen if they lost the ranch, tried to live in the present instead of borrowing trouble from the future. But the future arrived anyway, as it always did. In late April, Martin Greer rode out to the ranch with news. His expression was grave as Clara showed him into the parlor where Luke and Samuel were waiting. "I'll get straight to the point," Greer said. "Judge Morrison has reviewed all the evidence and testimony, and he's prepared to make his ruling next week. But before he does, there's been an unexpected development." "What kind of development?" Luke asked. "Thornton Harper has made a formal offer to purchase the property. He's offering $15,000, a fair price, perhaps even generous given the current market. The judge is inclined to accept the offer and close the estate, which would give Harper full ownership." Clara felt the floor tilt beneath her. $15,000. There was no way she and Luke could compete with that kind of money. "What about us?" Samuel asked, his weathered face creased with worry. "What happens to the people who work here?" "Harper has indicated he'll keep the foreman position," Greer said, looking at Luke. "He recognizes your value and expertise, but he wants to bring in his own household staff, which means Samuel and Miss Dawson would need to find other positions." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She'd known this was possible, had tried to prepare herself for it, but the reality was still devastating. She was going to lose her home, her place, everything she'd built here. "When does the judge make his final ruling?" Luke asked, his voice tight. "1 week from today. If you have any objections or alternative proposals, you need to present them before then." Greer stood, clearly uncomfortable with being the bearer of bad news. "I'm sorry, I wish the news were better." After Greer left, the three of them sat in stunned silence. Finally, Samuel spoke. "Well, hell," he said succinctly. "Begging your pardon, Clara, but hell! I need some air," Luke said abruptly, standing and striding toward the door. Clara started to follow him, but Samuel caught her arm. "Let him be for a bit. He needs to process this in his own way. You can talk to him later." So Clara stayed in the house, helping Samuel prepare supper mechanically, her mind spinning. What would she do? Where would she go? She had nearly $100 saved now, enough to travel back east or to try to find another position out west. But the thought of leaving Luke, of being separated from him, was unbearable. She found him an hour later in the barn, sitting on a hay bale and staring at nothing. Clara sat down beside him, not speaking, just being present. "I've been trying to figure out how to make this work," Luke said finally, "trying to find a solution that lets us stay together. But I keep coming back to the same problem. I don't have enough money. I've saved about $600 over the years, which is nothing compared to $15,000. "I have 100, Clara offered. "Together, that's 700. It's still not enough." "Not even close." Luke turned to look at her, his eyes full of frustration and love. "Clara, I need you to know something. When Harper takes over and brings in his own people, I'm not staying. I don't care what he offers me. I'm not working for a man who'd throw you and Samuel out just to bring in his own staff. Luke, you can't quit. This ranch means nothing without you." Luke took her hands in his. "I meant what I said before. My life is what I make it, and I choose to make it with you. We'll find work somewhere else. Maybe not as good as here, but we'll manage." Clara felt tears threaten. "I don't want you to give up everything for me." "I'm not giving it up. I'm choosing something better." Luke pulled her close, and Clara buried her face in his shoulder, breathing in the scent of hay and leather and him. They sat together in the barn until the light faded, holding each other, drawing strength from their connection. Finally, as darkness fell, they returned to the house for a somber supper. That night, Clara lay awake in her room, her mind churning. There had to be a solution, some way to save the situation. She thought about Luke's idea from weeks ago, buying the ranch themselves. It had seemed impossible then, and it seemed even more impossible now with Harper's generous offer on the table. But was there any way, any possibility at all? An idea began to form, crazy and desperate, but perhaps not entirely impossible. Clara sat up in bed, her heart racing. It was risky, and it required her to be bolder than she'd ever been in her life. But it might just work. The next morning, Clara rode into Silver Ridge alone, telling Luke and Samuel she needed to handle some personal business. She headed straight for the telegraph office and composed a carefully worded message to her father's former business partner in Boston, a man named Theodore Whitmore, no relation to the Philadelphia lawyer, who had escaped the financial collapse that had ruined her father. Whitmore had written to Clara after her father's death, expressing regret and offering belated assistance. But Clara had been too proud and too hurt to respond. Now, swallowing that pride, Clara sent the telegram. Need immediate loan. Have opportunity for profitable investment. Will repay with interest. Please wire response care of Silver Ridge Bank. Urgent. Clara Dawson. It was a long shot. Whitmore might refuse, might not even remember her, but it was the only option Clara could think of. She also stopped at the bank and asked to speak with the manager, a portly man named Harrison Burke, who'd always been cordial when she'd come to town. Mr. Burke, I need to inquire about the possibility of a loan. Burke looked sympathetic but doubtful. Miss Dawson, you know I hold you in high regard, but the bank's policy is quite strict about lending to unmarried women. We'd need either a male co-signer or substantial collateral, which I understand you don't possess. What if I had a co-signer? What if Luke Callahan were willing to sign with me? That would change things certainly. Mr. Callahan has an excellent reputation, and he has some savings with us, but I have to ask, what would you need the loan for? Clara took a deep breath. To make an offer on the Porter Ranch. I know Thornton Harper has offered $15,000, but I'm hoping to match or exceed that offer. I have some savings, and I'm expecting a loan from back east. If I could get a loan from the bank as well, I might be able to put together a competitive offer. Burke looked at her with new respect. That's ambitious, Miss Dawson. Very ambitious. But I have to be honest with you, even with a co-signer and partial funding from elsewhere, the bank would be hard-pressed to lend enough to match Harper's offer. We're talking about a substantial sum. I understand, but would you at least consider it? If I can get the funding from Boston and Luke is willing to co-sign, would you meet with us to discuss terms? Burke was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. I'll consider it. Bring me a detailed proposal. How much you're seeking, what you're bringing to the table, how you plan to make the ranch profitable enough to repay the loan. If the numbers make sense and Mr. Callahan is willing to co-sign, I'll take it to the board, but I'm making no promises, Miss Dawson. That's all I'm asking. Thank you, Mr. Burke. Clara returned to the ranch that afternoon with a fragile seed of hope in her chest. She found Luke in the barn, as usual, and pulled him aside to explain what she'd done. You did what? Luke looked stunned. Clara, that's incredibly brave and probably a little crazy. I know, but I had to try. I couldn't just accept defeat without fighting back. Clara gripped his hands. Luke, if the loan from Boston comes through, and if the bank is willing to work with us, we might actually be able to do this. We might be able to buy the ranch and run it ourselves, the way you suggested. Even if we get the money, there's no guarantee the judge will accept our offer over Harper's. No, but at least we'll have made the attempt. At least we'll know we fought for what we wanted instead of just letting circumstances push us around. Luke pulled her close, kissing her forehead. You're amazing, you know that? Absolutely amazing. All right, I'm in. Whatever you need from me, whatever it takes, I'm with you. The next 3 days were agonizing. Clara checked with the telegraph office twice daily, waiting for a response from Theodore Whitmore. Luke worked with her in the evenings, putting together a detailed proposal for the bank, inventory of assets, projected income, proposed improvements, repayment schedule. Samuel, when he learned what they were planning, contributed his own savings, $200 he'd been hoarding for his old age. You'll need every penny, he said gruffly when Clara tried to refuse. Besides, if you two young fools pull this off, I'll have a place to live out my days in peace. That's worth more than money to me. On the fourth day, Clara received a telegram. Her hand shook as she opened it. We'll wire $2,000 to Silver Ridge Bank. Stop. Consider it gift not loan. Stop. Your father would be proud. Stop. Good luck. Stop. Theodore Whitmore. Clara read the telegram 3 times, unable to believe what she was seeing. $2,000. Not a loan, but a gift. It was more than she dared to hope for. She rode back to the ranch at a gallop, bursting into the barn where Luke was working. He sent it. Whitmore sent $2,000, and he says it's a gift, not a loan. Luke swept her up in his arms, spinning her around, both of them laughing with joy and relief. When he set her down, his expression grew serious. So, let's do the math. You have 100 saved, I have 600, Samuel has 200, and now we have 2,000 from Whitmore. That's $2,900. If the bank will lend us 12,000, we can offer Harper's exact price of 15,000, but that's a lot for the bank to lend. I know, but it's our best shot. Let's take the proposal to Burke tomorrow and see what he says. They met with Harrison Burke the next morning, laying out their proposal in detail. Burke reviewed their numbers carefully, asking pointed questions about projected revenue and expenses, about their plans for managing the ranch, about contingencies if things went wrong. Finally, after what felt like hours, Burke set down his pen and looked at them seriously. "This is highly irregular," he said. "The bank doesn't typically make loans of this size to first-time property owners. But I have to admit, your proposal is solid. You clearly understand ranching, Mr. Callahan, and Miss Dawson, your financial projections are impressively thorough. If you're willing to accept some rather strict terms, including the ranch itself as collateral and a repayment period of no more than 10 years, I believe I can convince the board to approve a loan of $10,000. Clara's heart sank. $10,000? But we need 12 to match Harper's offer. I understand, but 10 is the absolute maximum the board will approve for an untested borrower. However, Burke continued, if you can find another source for the additional 2,000, you'd be able to make an offer of $14,900. That's only $100 less than Harper's offer. It's possible the judge might accept it, especially if you can make a compelling case for local ownership. Clara looked at Luke, saw the same calculation happening in his eyes. Where could they possibly find another $2,000 in less than 2 days? We'll find it, Luke said firmly. Thank you, Mr. Burke. We'll be in touch. Outside the bank, they stood on the sidewalk, both thinking furiously. Edith, Clara said suddenly, what if we asked Edith? She has her own ranch, her own resources. She might be willing to invest. Or at least loan us the money, Luke agreed. It's worth asking. They rode out to the Harper Ranch immediately, finding Edith in her barn, supervising the branding of new calves. When they explained the situation, Edith listened carefully, her sharp eyes assessing. So you need $2,000 to make a competitive offer on Porter Ranch, she summarized. And you're asking me to invest? We're asking you to consider it, Clara said. We'd pay you back with interest, same as the bank. Or if you'd rather be a partner with a stake in the ranch, we could discuss that too. We're open to any arrangement that works. Edith was quiet for a long moment, looking between them. Then she smiled slowly. Mary Porter was my best friend, she said. I stood beside her when she married James, was with her when she died. I'd hate to see her ranch fall into the hands of some Philadelphia banker who doesn't give a damn about this land or the people who work it. So yes, I'll give you the $2,000, but not as a loan. Then as what? Luke asked. As a wedding gift. You two are planning to marry, aren't you? Because if you're buying this ranch together, you'd better be planning to make it legal. Clara felt her cheeks flush. She and Luke had talked about marriage in vague future terms, but they hadn't made any concrete plans. Luke, however, didn't hesitate. Yes, ma'am, we're planning to marry, just been waiting for the right time. Then consider this my early wedding present. Seed money for your life together. Pay me back if you want, when you're able. But there's no rush and no interest. All I ask is that you run that ranch the way James and Mary would have wanted, with integrity and heart. Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks. Edith, thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet. You still have to convince the judge to accept your offer. Edith pulled out her checkbook. But I believe in you two. You've got something special, the kind of partnership that builds lasting things. Now let's get this done. With Edith's $2,000, they had everything they needed. Luke and Clara spent the rest of that day and all of the next preparing their formal offer and the arguments to support it. They documented their combined experience managing the ranch, their deep knowledge of the land and livestock, their commitment to maintaining employment for the current staff. They gathered letters of support from neighbors, from the local minister, from townspeople who believed in local ownership over absentee landlords. The hearing before Judge Morrison was scheduled for 2 o'clock on Friday afternoon. Clara dressed in one of Mary Porter's finest dresses, the deep blue silk she'd first discovered in the cellar, hoping it would bring her luck. Luke wore his best suit, which he'd borrowed from Samuel, and which was slightly too short in the sleeves, but made him look distinguished nonetheless. The courtroom was small and stuffy, already crowded with interested parties when they arrived. Martin Greer was there, of course, and to Clara's dismay, so was Reginald Whitmore, the Philadelphia lawyer. But also present were Edith Harper, Samuel, and several of their neighbors from surrounding ranches. The community had come out to support them. Judge Morrison was a stern-looking man in his 60s, with white hair and penetrating dark eyes. He called the hearing to order and began by summarizing the situation. "We're here today to settle the estate of James Porter, deceased. Mr. Thornton Harper of Philadelphia has made an offer of $15,000 to purchase the property. However, I've recently received a competing offer from Mr. Luke Callahan and Miss Clara Dawson in the amount of $14,900. Mr. Whitmore, you may present Mr. Harper's case first." Whitmore stood, every inch the polished attorney. He argued that Harper's offer was higher, that Harper had legitimate family claim through his cousin Mary, that Harper had the financial resources to ensure the ranch's continued success. It was a compelling presentation, and Clara felt her stomach sink with each point he made. Then it was their turn. Luke stood first, speaking with quiet conviction about his 8 years at the ranch, about his knowledge of the land and the livestock, about his commitment to honoring James Porter's legacy. He spoke about the importance of local ownership, of keeping the ranch in the hands of people who loved the land rather than seeing it as merely an investment. Then Clara stood, her legs shaking but her voice steady. She explained how she'd come west to marry James Porter, how his death had left her stranded but had ultimately given her a home and a purpose. She talked about the work she'd done organizing the ranch's finances, about her vision for its future. And she talked about community, about how the ranch wasn't just a business, but a vital part of the local economy, employing people and supporting families. "Your Honor," Clara concluded, "we may not have family ties to James Porter, but we have something more important. We have love for this land and commitment to its future. We're offering not just money, but our lives, our labor, our dedication. We're asking you to give us the chance to prove what we can build together." Judge Morrison listened to both sides, asked pointed questions, and then called for a brief recess while he considered his decision. Clara and Luke waited outside the courtroom with their supporters, too nervous to talk much. After 30 agonizing minutes, they were called back in. Judge Morrison looked at them with an expression Clara couldn't read. "This has been a difficult decision," he began. "Both offers have merit. However, after careful consideration, I've decided to accept the offer from Mr. Callahan and Miss Dawson." Clara felt the words wash over her like a wave, almost unable to believe what she was hearing. "While Mr. Harper's offer is technically $100 higher," the judge continued, "the intangible benefits of local ownership outweigh that small financial difference. Mr. Callahan and Miss Dawson have demonstrated their commitment to this community and their capability to manage the property successfully. Therefore, I'm ruling that the estate of James Porter be sold to Luke Callahan and Clara Dawson for the sum of $14,900, with closing to occur within 30 days. The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause from their neighbors. Edith was crying openly, and Samuel was grinning so wide his face looked like it might split. Luke pulled Clara into his arms, holding her tight while she sobbed with relief and joy against his shoulder. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd actually done it. Whitmore left the courtroom quickly, looking displeased, but Greer came over to shake their hands. "Congratulations," he said warmly. "I must admit, I didn't think you'd pull it off, but I'm glad you did. James would have approved." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal paperwork, bank meetings, and planning for their future. But in the midst of all the business, Luke pulled Clara aside one evening as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset. "I know we have 1,000 things to do," he said, "but there's one thing that can't wait any longer. Clara Dawson, will you marry me?" Clara laughed, tears streaming down her face. "We're already buying a ranch together. I think marriage is implied at this point." "I don't care about implied. I want to hear you say yes." "Yes," Clara said, kissing him. "Yes, absolutely. Forever, yes. They were married 2 weeks later in the parlor of Porter Ranch. Their ranch now, with Samuel and Edith and half the county in attendance. Clara wore the blue silk dress that had belonged to Mary Porter, feeling like she was being blessed by the woman who'd lived in this house before her. Luke wore his borrowed suit and looked so nervous and happy that Clara wanted to kiss him every time she looked at him. The ceremony was simple, conducted by the local minister, but Clara felt the weight and importance of every word. When Luke slipped a simple gold band on her finger, she thought about the journey that had brought her here, from Boston to Montana, from desperation to hope, from freezing alone on a platform to standing in a warm house surrounded by friends, marrying a man who saw her worth and loved her fiercely. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister said. "Luke, you may kiss your bride." And he did, thoroughly, while their friends and neighbors cheered. The celebration lasted well into the night. Edith had insisted on making the wedding cake, a towering confection that Clara suspected had consumed most of the county's sugar supply. Samuel had roasted a whole steer, and neighbors had brought food and drink enough to feed an army. There was music and dancing, and at one point Luke swept Clara into his arms and waltzed her around the porch while everyone clapped. "Happy?" he asked, holding her close. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Clara answered truthfully. Later, after the guests had finally left and the house had grown quiet, Luke and Clara stood together in what was now their bedroom, the same room Clara had occupied since coming to the ranch, but transformed now by Luke's presence in it. "I can't quite believe this is real," Clara said, looking at the gold band on her finger. 6 months ago, I was standing on a train platform thinking I was going to die. And now I'm married to you, and we own this ranch, and we have a future together. It's almost too much good fortune to comprehend." "We make our own fortune," Luke said, pulling her close. "We chose this, Clara. We fought for it. We earned it. And we're going to build something beautiful here. I can feel it." And they did. Over the months and years that followed, Luke and Clara transformed Porter Ranch into something that honored its past while embracing its future. They ran it as true partners, Luke managing the livestock and land while Clara handled the books and the business side. They made improvements slowly and carefully, always mindful of their debt but never sacrificing quality or integrity. Samuel stayed on, of course, growing old gracefully in the ranch house kitchen, teaching Clara his recipes and his wisdom about life on the frontier. Edith Harper remained their closest friend and ally, visiting often and becoming the grandmother figure to the children who eventually came. 3 of them, born over the course of 5 years, each one loved and celebrated. The ranch prospered. Luke's careful stewardship of the land and cattle paid off in steady profits that allowed them to repay their loans ahead of schedule. Clara's business acumen helped them weather the economic ups and downs that plagued other ranches. Together, they built a reputation for honesty and quality that made Porter Ranch, which they never renamed, feeling it was important to honor James and Mary's legacy, one of the most respected operations in Montana Territory. But more than the financial success or the community respect, what mattered most to Clara was the life she and Luke built together. They worked side by side every day, shared every decision, supported each other through challenges, and celebrated together in triumphs. The partnership they'd forged in crisis became the foundation of everything good in their lives. Sometimes on quiet evenings when the work was done and the children were asleep, Clara and Luke would sit together on the porch where he'd first asked her to marry him, watching the Montana sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Do you ever think about that night on the platform?" Luke asked her once, years after they'd married. "When you were freezing and alone and thought no one was coming?" "Sometimes," Clara admitted, "but not with sadness anymore. Because that night led to this, to us, to this life, to everything we've built. If James Porter hadn't died, if you hadn't found me on that platform, I would have had a very different life. Probably not a bad life, but not this one. Not this perfect, unexpected, beautiful life. You're not disappointed, then? That you didn't get the marriage of convenience you came west for?" Clara looked at her husband, this strong, gentle man who'd saved her life and then given her so much more than safety. She thought about their children playing in the yard, about the ranch thriving under their care, about the community they'd built around them. She thought about love, real and deep and lasting,
The kind of love she hadn't even known to hope for when she'd answered James Porter's advertisement all those years ago. Disappointed? Clara laughed, taking Luke's hand. I came west looking for security and found everything I didn't know I needed. I came looking for shelter and found home. I came expecting one man and found the right one instead. No, Luke Callahan, I'm not disappointed. I'm grateful. I'm so incredibly grateful. Luke pulled her close, wrapping her in the warmth of his arms, just as he'd wrapped her in his coat that freezing February night. And Clara closed her eyes and listened to his heartbeat, and thought about all the unexpected grace that had brought her here. To this porch, this land, this life, this love. Years later, when their children were grown and beginning their own adventures, when Clara's hair had gone gray and Luke's face had weathered even further under the Montana sun, they would still sometimes talk about that night, about how Clara had sat shivering on a platform, waiting for a future that never came, while the future she actually needed was riding toward her through a blizzard, about how Luke had wrapped her in his coat and promised she wouldn't be alone, about how some promises, once made, echo through entire lifetimes. The ranch passed eventually to their eldest daughter, who ran it with the same integrity and love her parents had shown. And on the mantel in the ranch house, beside photographs of family and friends, sat a battered sheepskin coat, the same coat Luke had worn that February night in 1878. It was a reminder, Clara told her grandchildren when they asked about it, that warmth comes in many forms, that salvation sometimes arrives on horseback through a storm, that the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best ones if we're brave enough to keep moving forward, and that true love, the kind that lasts, often begins not with passion or romance, but with one simple act of kindness, a stranger wrapping his coat around someone who's cold and alone, and saying the words that change everything. You're not alone. I'll see you safe. That promise, made on a frozen platform in the Montana Territory winter of 1878, kept them warm for the rest of their lives.